Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was adopted by Inoichi. Inoichi's decision to adopt the boy was a spur-of-the-moment thing, but he stood by it, and he could not be prouder of both his children, even if they lived to give him gray hair. Or, how a Yamanaka-trained Naruto went and cheerfully dismantled the last shreds of Sasuke's self-image, because conventional therapy obviously wasn't working well enough, and then proved that even the best minds could be entirely dumb when it came to romance. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 18, The Great Farce I. Chapter text. No, said Shibi-sensei. It is illogical to risk one's hive on a dangerous mission if one knows the hive does not have the skills to accomplish the objective. Except as a distraction for a more skilled hive? Suggested Ami-chan, looking up from her chemical equations. Shibi-sensei conceded this exception with a nod, but pointed out, do you wish to be the distraction so that one of the other teams may pass more easily? No, sensei, chorused the girls. A wise choice, said the jounin. Keiko shook her head. I can't believe we're fine with using hive as a description of our team. Ami-chan shrugged. I can't believe it either. Fuyumi-chan scratched at her mussed-up hair. You honestly don't mind that everyone except us got entered into the Chunin exams? I mind that they got entered, not that we didn't, specified Keiko. That situation wouldn't be improved by us making idiots of ourselves begging for something we don't really want. At least, that was how Ino-chan had presented it to her. Keiko did agree with the sentiment, even though it didn't entirely squash the roiling envy. She reminded herself that she was in this to become a strong, solid kunoichi, not to crash and burn trying to show off for, well, anybody. Beautiful young flower of Konoha. After our flames of youth prevail in the Chunin exams, go out with me. Sakura punched the green weirdo in the head. Or, well, tried to. He dodged so fast he turned into a green blur, and swept Sakura's feet from under her, so she ended up sitting on her, but in staring upward with a mixture of homicidal rage and reluctant admiration. I joyously accept your challenge to a spar, fair maiden. Don't waste your time on the losers, Lee, said the androgynous teammate of Sakura's admirer, walking past them toward the stairs. Ino let out a quiet, but distinctly keening sound. Why couldn't I have been born a year earlier? She watched the byplay wistfully. A dishy bundle of complexes and a completely fucking whacked weirdo. I'll trade you, muttered the kunoichi of that team, who was busy sorting through scrolls. Not medical ones, surprisingly, as Ino would expect from any kunoichi on a team with two potential powerhouses. In a heartbeat, said Ino, and pointed behind herself at Chuji, who was stress-eating his third packet of chips, and Shikamaru, who seemed half asleep and half tired of living. Said the kunoichi. Ino nodded. Yes, I thought so. We're only missing Team 3, Naruto said cheerfully, once Hinata-chan joined their huddle, going straight to Ino for her obligatory cuddle. Oh, right. Kiba stood more or less in one place and didn't invade anybody's personal space, which was an astounding and unexpected personal growth. Not to mention his honest-to-Izanagi indoors volume. Why aren't they here? Shino pushed up his glasses. Father thought that the decision to nominate rookies was at best risky, and at worst amounted to criminal negligence on the part of the teachers. Why? Because the likelihood of death is not negligible. Father chose not to endanger his students needlessly when it was plain that they were not ready for advancement yet. It's exactly what Gai-sensei did a year ago, said Tenten, the older kunoichi Ino had dragged along after they had bonded over terrible team assignments. Boy, I hope we kick arse this time. Tenten, said a deep voice in a deeply offended by your existence tone, a tone that Sasuke had also perfected and overused with relish. Do not lower yourself to conversation with lost causes. Tenten drooped. When she looked up, her face was twisted with second-hand embarrassment. Don't mind him, guys, Neji's always like that. Just make sure you don't die, okay? Prove the superiority of hard work over genius and win your love. Sounded across the room. 10-10 sighed. That's my cue. Naruto watched Ino watch her go with sympathy. The written test was a joke. In hindsight, Sakura could see how it was funny if you were in on it, but from her point of view she had just made her wrist hurt and wasted brain power only to be told that the whole objective was for her to sit, mind her own business, and wait for further orders. That scarred proctor could go fuck himself dry, the arsehole. Yeah, she had switched, which Yoshi had asked her not to do until the written test was over, but she had limits, and a long acquaintance with the Yamanaka gave her a bit of a trigger when it came to mindfuck. You may call me the glorious Anko-sama, announced the new proctor. Sakura liked her despite herself. Polite cringed, but that was all social conditioning. This woman walked around like she was constantly giving everybody two birds, and Sakura could respect a bitch like that. Hey, it's Snake Princess. Yoshi called out cheerfully, and that was it. Signed, sealed, delivered, Sakura had found her future mentor. Notice me, senpai, she thought, and ignored Polite, who had mostly just fallen silent due to mind-numbing incredulity. That's Snake Queen to you, Yamanaka-too, the proctor tossed out, and surveyed the half-empty room. More like snake creep, muttered Kiba. Ino theatrically pushed her chair further away from Dog Boy, making a loud scraping sound that ensured everybody was watching her for the moment. I would say it was nice knowing you, Inuzuka, but I don't want the last thing you'll ever hear to be a lie. Wah-arg. He did it to himself, Yoshi remarked, as the rest of the room watched Kiba being nearly perforated with several kunai, scared into trembling like a rodent in sights of a snake, and then mildly molested. Note to self, Tenten said dryly, don't piss off the proctor. The proctor let Kiba pour back into his seat and grinned first at Tenten, and then at the other genin she recognized. There's a smart one in the crowd. Kick butts, Yamanaka squared. I'm not allowed to cheer, but I'm totally illegally cheering for you. The department's too drab without a blonde terror to lighten it up, so hurry up and get those chunin vests. As they filed out of the classroom, Yoshi turned back and waved. Bye, Anko-san. We'll tell Dad you miss him. Ino thought she would hate the forest of death. She might, in a couple of days, when she would have to wash her hair in a brook, but right now she was happy to have a great many things to kill, so she enjoyed herself, and did not even mount a protest when Shikamaru determinedly dragged them in the direction of the gate that had been assigned to Team 7. Boys, honestly. Hey, brother, she said as they approached. She formed a hand sign. Yoshi relaxed from the ready-to-attack stance. Sisterer? He in turn signed to the trees, from whence the rest of his team appeared. I thought this was a team exam. Emphasis on team. Don't look at me. Ino shrugged. I wasn't the one who made the suggestion to team up with you, and then insisted on doing it. She turned to Shikamaru. So did Chuji. So did the entire Team 7. Shikamaru went stiff under the weight of the scrutiny, but pretended that he was too busy watching the flight patterns of the carrion birds flying overhead. It was the optimal strategy. Sasuke judgmentally looked over Team 8, member by member, ending up looking downwards at Akamaru. Hinata insisted, Inuzuka explained helplessly. Sasuke wasn't impressed. And we've got a spare heaven scroll because Hinata did not like one of the other Konoha teams. And Shino. My Kakachu informed me that those persons were contaminated by suspicious chakra. I found merit in Ladybug's proposal to neutralize them. Neutralize, Inuzuka repeated to emphasize how inadequate he thought that word was. Sasuke thought they were all weak and indecisive. If they thought the other team was a potential threat, they should have eliminated them. They were all alive when we departed, reported Aburame. Why? In deference to possibly being Konoha shinobi after all. Possibly, Inuzuka mouthed incredulously behind his back. Akamaru barked, but he sounded like he was agreeing more with Aburame than with Inuzuka. Sasuke-san. Hyuga tried to speak. Sasuke put her out of her misery. Whatever. It's not like Ino Shikacho are not riding our coattails too. They had expected battles, of course. But not like this. That wasn't Itachi, Naruto pointed out. Sasuke, still trembling and staring blankly at the spot from which the ninja had disappeared, hollowly said, "Do I look like I care, Bleach Boy?" More importantly, Sakura cut in, "Do you have another of those seals? Just in case, I might be having a crisis of faith in the competence of Konoha's security." Blood dripped from her knuckles. There were a few broken trees lying around the clearing. Here, muttered Shikamaru somewhere in the background. Such a pain. In the arse, Ino and Chuji finished in practiced unison. That was, Hinata-chan spoke, nervous but determined, a very good use of shadow manipulation, Shikamaru-kun. Your destruction of the summon was also impressive, Ladybug, said Shino. Akamaru barked in agreement. Yeah, easy for you to say. You're the one not covered in snake guts, grumbled Kiba, who had helped his Ninken rip apart several of the smaller summons. Once Naruto was fairly sure that Sasuke was not going to have a shiny new psychotic break, he turned to Sakura and answered her question. Give me 5 minutes. Keep watch. He dropped to the ground and opened his Fuinjutsu kit. He knew the seal by heart, and with the use of shadow clones he could have a reverse summoning for the hypothermia cell scroll for every member of the Rookie 9 ready within that time limit. Because fighting a Sannin as part of the Chunin exams was fucking ridiculous, and he was done relying on other people to protect him. Ino had broken Hinata-chan off of that self-destructive fixation on being fair in every situation, so not a single one of the 9 Genin had a real problem with teaming up. They gathered 8 scrolls between them, and only one serious injury, which Yoshi's weird blood limit had healed before they arrived at the tower. Sakura solved the clue for them, which was why Ino did feel mildly guilty when Sakura was selected as Ino's opponent for the preliminary match. This matchup sucks, Ino said apologetically as they faced one another in the arena. Sakura flickered between hot and cool for so long that Ino was tempted to snap her into one of the personalities. But that wouldn't have been, well, fair. Ino waited. Sakura could choose for herself. Eventually, Sakura raised her head and turned to the proctor. I forfeit. Quietly, so that only Ino could hear, she added, Kami fuck it in all the stinking orifices. Sakura-chan, said Ino. She had not expected that. Sakura's shoulders stiffened. Ino could see her switch back so she could explain with a summer breeze soft and calmness. We can't use Jinjutsu or Ninjutsu dash. Admittedly, neither of them knew any that would work on the other one, including the Yamanaka techniques due to Sakura's mental condition. You are better at taijutsu and bladed weaponry, and I won't use medical techniques against an ally. Ino agreed that to harm the other at all, either would have had to try hard enough that the harm might be irreversible. She wanted to be noble too, but practicality would always win. Okay then. It just sucks. Sakura snorted and danced over to bump Ino's shoulder, and then put an arm around her waist. As long as you kick, but in the next round for the both of us. Promise, Ino assured her, and meant it with her entire being. She would also recruit Yoshi to fuck up the life of the bastard that had rigged the so-called random matchups. She was only willing to let that bastard live because she hadn't been ordered to fight Yoshi. Sakura hid her homicidal rage under the veneer of contentedness as she leaned into Ino's side. The only one who actually cheered for Shikamaru when he kicked that sound Kunoichi's arse was Chuji, because pretty much everybody else was watching Sakura being comforted by Ino, who was in turn being cuddled by Hinata, like that was normal. Kiba pulled out another paper tissue and held it under his nose. Hi, must all the girls do dat all the time? Is that a fucking joke? Ino-chan spat, eyes narrowing at the board and killing intent flaring. Hinata shuddered but, looking at the board, had to agree with the sentiment. The proctors claimed that the selections were random, but it was too much of a coincidence, especially in light of the matchup between Ino-chan and Sakura-chan. Either somebody wanted to specifically pair up ninja with similar specialties, or the Hyuga money had spoken once again, using a clan elder as its mouthpiece. "This is a team exam, Hinata-chan," Yoshi-kun reminded her from the other side. Ino-chan stopped cursing under her breath and hugged Hinata hard and fast. "Brother's right. You're not Hinata of the Hyuga now. You're Hinata of Team 8. Oddly, this was exactly what Hinata needed to hear. She understood the, suggestion, but it might as well have been an order. She smiled at the Yamanaka siblings and walked down to the arena. She might have been shaking, but at least she was not afraid. "Hinata Heim," said Neji and I-san. "No. Neji. Just Neji." Ino-chan had been very adamant about this. Perhaps one day, but not now. She was Hinata of Team 8, and this Team 9 shinobi was her opponent. She ignored the rain of insults and accusations with ease of long practice and turned to the administrator. "Ayano, Proctor-san? Did you know if the detained shinobi had been moved to a different cell yet?" The proctor seemed confused. Neji paused, apparently also uncertain what her question meant, and then he restarted assuring her that she would lose. "The cell has been emptied," said someone in the audience, off there. "The first exam's proctor. The one with the prominent facial scarring." Hinata bowed in thanks. Then I am ready to begin." She reached for the scroll Yoshi-kun had given her. Certainly, she was fast enough to activate the seal before Neji could complete 128 palms. "Found him," Yoshi reported excitedly and hopped up and down in place several times. In the arena below them, Shino faced off against some guy called Zaku. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going in, any special wishes?" Several people automatically looked at Nara, but Nara was either asleep or pretending to be, because his preliminary fight was over and thus, he could not be bothered to even maintain consciousness, never mind that one of his teammates was still waiting. Akimichi just gave everybody an apologetic shrug, like it was his fault that Nara was a dick. "That sand guy," Inuzuka muttered, "against somebody we don't care about." "Even better," Sakura hissed, "against one of his siblings." "Sasuke-kun, whom do you want to fight?" Sasuke opened his mouth. "And keep in mind that the goal is becoming Chunin and avenging me, 'cause those bastards messed with my chances dash." The other sand guy, Sasuke said, cursing himself for needing the reminder. It was so easy to get swallowed by the desire to make them all see, to prove to them. But no. Sakura was right. He had a clear goal, a simple mission. The proctors said it explicitly. At this stage of the exams, the quality of the performance did not matter at all. Only victory mattered. The other sand guy was a puppet user with a single puppet. There was a slight concern of poison, another Suna specialty, but with the Sharingan Sasuke could avoid being hit. So, Yoshi summarized, Gaara vs Temari, Sasuke vs Kankuro, Choji and Kiba against some of those other Konoha people we don't know. If you can't take them, at least we know they won't kill you. A boy for Choji, because this is not the time for aversion therapy. Everyone in agreement? What about you? Sasuke demanded. Yoshi laughed. I'm just overjoyed they didn't put me against Ino. Probably still too scared of Dad. Anyway dash. Sakura caught him before his body brained itself on the banister. If the idiot lost his match, or got caught, Sasuke was going to make him regret ever graduating. Temari took one look at the board, slammed her fan against the floor in a fit of pique, leaving a spider web of cracks, and promised to herself that someone was going to pay for this cheating. With a bitter grimace, she announced, Proctor, I forfeit. Hopefully, Gaara wouldn't take the loss of his opportunity for sanctioned murder too violently. Sasuke, predictably, won his match. Kiba and Choji both lost, but at least neither was seriously hurt. Finally, once Sakura's arms were about to go numb and Hinata-chan looked a little strained holding up the genjutsu that made it seem like Yoshi-kun was conscious, the board showed the next matchup. Yamanaka Yoshi vs Akato Yoroi. Yoshi took a deep, gasping breath, coughed, and smiled, making both Sakura and Hinata-chan smile back. "Huh, guys, get this. Before I messed with it, the selection was really random choice. How's that for bad luck?" Sakura let go of him. Sadly, at that point Hinata-chan was still holding up the genjutsu, so no one saw him fall on his arse. Chuji had lost his duel. Shikamaru closed his eyes and pretended that he had slept through it. He had been worried that Chuji would lose. He owed Yoshi for making sure that Chuji's opponent was somebody that wouldn't have hurt him too badly, because Shikamaru himself had been too scared to say a name, to make that recommendation. Scared that when Chuji lost, he might blame Shikamaru. Or worse, that he might not, and all the assigning of blame would be up to Shikamaru himself. Which would have been far too troublesome. The door opened, letting in a sliver of light, before Neji had begun to feel warm, and thus probably before any permanent damage was inflicted. Surrounded by chakra-suppressing seals, Neji could barely see anything even with the light. There was a technician of small stature, with several ANBU flanking her. Oh, thank Izanami dash. Neji scowled and, with some difficulty, drew himself upright. Excuse me dash. Shit, sorry, come on right out, Hyuga-san. The woman of indeterminate rank signed something to the ANBU, who backed up. Do you need any help dash? I take it to mean, Neji spoke carefully, feeling as though he were drugged, that my cousin has won the preliminary duel. Since you're, outside of the arena, the technician shrugged. I guess so. I see. The sensation of warmth began to creep in. Neji let his mostly blind eyes trail over the walls of the icebox he had been locked in. Am I detained? No, of course not, the woman assured him with amusement that seemed grossly misplaced to Neji. But after the snake Sanin, we were kinda worried we'd have to deal with, like, Uchiha Itachi or something, he. Neji resented the cheer, but he was let out, provided with a thick blanket and given warm tea, so he refrained from informing her of his honest opinion. It was not as though anyone had ever been interested in Neji's opinion on anything, anyway. Kakashi wasn't sure if he was annoyed or impressed that his terribly bad idea of a team had rigged the Chunin exams. Whom was he kidding? He was impressed. Sasuke and Yoshi were both in the finals, which would cause a bit of a scheduling nightmare, but it was worth it. Too bad about Sakura. He should have taught the girl some genjutsu. Or at least some basic doton jutsu. She looked like the type that would enjoy smothering someone under a wall of mud. Then again, some days she looked like the type that would enjoy opening a person throat to groin and watching them try to hold their guts inside their body. So maybe kenjutsu? Yuki did not often see Inoichi cry, but he was one of those rare men aware of the fragility of the important things surrounding him, so he did not channel heartbreak into aggression the way others might. He let tears wash it away and, unless the grief was especially haunting, he even let Yuki comfort him. Like today. Her husband lay on the sofa, sleeping deeply, head pillowed on Yuki's thigh and a curtain of blonde hair hiding his face, when her children melted out of the shadows like a pair of vengeful sprites. What's wrong with Dad? Whispered Ino. Yuki was not much pleased about her openly murderous expression, but a time to remedy that would come later. Yeah, who do we have to kill? Agreed Yoshi. While her daughter was entirely unrepentant, her son did react to Yuki's look. His face shifted into a shallow smile. I mean, how can we help? Yuki opened her mouth to tell them they couldn't help, but that was not entirely true, was it? They had considerable skills for ninjas so young, and Yuki had already seen the results of their earlier, less refined efforts in the Hyuga girl and the Uchiha boy. The risk was worth it. That boy Hyuga Hinata defeated today in the tournament dash. Her arsehole cousin, Ino ad-libbed. Is the son of someone your father had once been close to, Yuki continued, warning her daughter with a look that this storytelling could be stopped at any time if she could not keep her rude tongue shut inside her mouth. That boy's father died when you were too young to remember. Perhaps not Yoshi, who remembered a little too much from that age, sadly, but then, Yoshi would never have had a reason to meet Hisashi. Yuki sighed and carted her fingers through Inoichi's hair. That boy is not well, and your father cannot help him. She looked up. Twin expressions of determination directed at her confirmed that they understood. The children shared a look between them, and then turned to look at Inoichi. Mission accepted. It was not quite the graveyard appointment yet, but Hiruzen had rescheduled all that could wait until tomorrow, and Inoichi was his last meeting of the day before he would go down to the TNI and face his greatest failure. Perhaps another Kage could have remained sitting in his high tower and pretended that everything was perfectly well now that the missing Nin had been incarcerated, but Hiruzen had never stopped seeing his student in Orochimaru-kun's face. He remembered how enthusiastic his student had been, how determined, how fiercely he had fought for Konoha, and how much he had sacrificed without a second thought. For that amazing boy to change into this creature, something devastating must have occurred. Something that Hiruzen had overlooked, and he viscerally needed to know what it was. Ah, Inoichi, he said, hearing the surprise in his voice and feeling at the same time too old, and like a student woefully unprepared for his test. The young clan head favored him with a scrutiny that probably read not only what Hiruzen felt and thought, but also what he had had for breakfast, which seemed to have occurred half a lifetime ago. Unless something goes drastically wrong, your son will be promoted, Hiruzen said, too weary to beat about the bush. Once he reaches Chunin status, he will begin training in his specialties. Hiruzen might not have been a Yamanaka, but he could read Inoichi's reaction loud and clear. He had been at the receiving end on such a look from a clan head once before. That clan head had been Uchiha Fugaku, and it had happened mere days before the massacre. Perhaps Hiruzen should have dismissed Shikaku before this meeting, but his mind was not quite what it used to be. I have sent a summons to Jiraiya, Hiruzen informed his subordinate with all the authority he could muster. He reminded himself not to think of Orochimaru, not yet, that would come later. On some days it felt as though he were juggling kunai, so many of his ninja were angry, many of them angry with him, and of those quite a few rightfully so. He would never forget to cover his back when Kakashi-kun was around. Konoha had similar specialists before, as far as I know, Inoichi said evasively. Did not either of them leave behind any resources? Is your student truly the only one that can teach my son? What is it that qualifies him so uniquely? Hiruzen suppressed a hearty sigh. He should have expected this, should have expected it years ago when he had allowed Inoichi to adopt Naruto-chan. That was the problem with parents, they often wanted the best for their children regardless of whether the village would suffer for it. He is a seal master and a sage, Hiruzen explained, and thus equipped to deal with mishaps. And he has been preparing for this role for 13 years. Has he? Inoichi's eyes narrowed, and his voice went cold. So, he was not surprised to hear that his charge had disappeared 9 years ago under suspicious circumstances, and is presumed dead? Probably dead in a gutter somewhere and eaten by rats. Inoichi, Hiruzen rubbed his forehead. He was 2 decades too old to deal with this. I will look into options. If none other presents itself, I will bring Jiraiya in. I look forward to your coup. As you say, Hokage-sama, Inoichi replied non-committally, and took his leave. It would not be that difficult, Shikaku asserted nonchalantly. Hiruzen refrained from rolling his eyes at his chief strategist. With you planning it, I am sure it would not be. Inoichi was woken up half an hour before dawnbreak by an out-of-breath Anbu bearing the news of Sandaime-sama's death. Chapter 19, The Great Farce 2. Chapter text. Shikaku seemed to be the last person who had seen Sandaime-sama alive. Or, to be more accurate, he was one of the last 3 people to see Sandaime-sama alive. The other 2 were Anbu guards, and the reason for why Shikaku was not presently under suspicion. Inoichi was technically under suspicion, due to how disastrously his last meeting with Sarutobi-sama had gone and the fact that he had not bothered to hide his displeasure after her had left the tower. At least no one believed in his guilt seriously, and Ibiki had let him spend the night sitting on the sofa in his office rather than in an interrogation cell, and then let him go, since the department was busy hunting for Orochimaru. Again. "Excuse me," said Ibiki, walking into Shikaka's house in the late afternoon. He glanced at Inoichi stretched out and dozing under the kotatsu, and his expression darkened. "Yes?" snapped Yoshino. Ibiki flinched, and then turned to look at her. Shikaka's lovely wife was curled up in the armchair that could not be seen from the doorway, looking ready to spring and disembowel someone. "I'm sorry for barging in, Yoshino-san," Ibiki said with just the right balance of meekness and confidence for Yoshino to relent. He glanced at Inoichi again, and then turned to Shikaku. "We're officially declaring Orochimaru to be Sandaime-sama's murderer." "Officially," Shikaku repeated. He had a dark suspicion about where this was leading. "We," Ibiki replied, casting another unsubtle glance at Inoichi, "are of the mind that no advantage would come out of disclosing the facts. If Sandaime-sama was dead before Orochimaru had escaped from the cells, that would only alert Orochimaru's spy that we are searching for them. And while no one may ever be entirely above suspicion," he looked at Inoichi again and fell silent. Shikaka did not like owing a favor this big, but Inoichi was his best friend and one of the best men Shikaka had ever had the privilege to know, and Ibiki would never have offered this if he had a smidgen of suspicion that Inoichi might have been culpable in any way. He nodded. "You may count on me, Ibiki-san." Kakashi knew that this moment was coming ever since Jiraiya crossed the village gates, and he was prepared. "Where is Minato-kun's son, Kakashi?" demanded the sage. Kakashi looked up from Ika Paradise. Not even its presence seemed to mollify its author. He sympathized. He did. After all, he had been there, once, a long time ago. Why, it almost felt like he had been a different person then. Certainly, Jiraiya had not been gone for so long that he and Kakashi were complete strangers now? Or had he? Well, now that did change things a little bit, didn't it? "I spent 4 years trying to find him," Kakashi said truthfully. 4 years filled with despair, which nearly culminated in his suicide attempt. He had murdered on his quest, and technically betrayed the village, even though he had been skillful enough not to be caught at it. "And then you gave up?" The accusation might have stung, had it not come from a man that had not lifted a pinky finger for Uzumaki Naruto in 13 years. In light of events, Kakashi honestly did not understand on what authority Jiraiya demanded any information about the boy whatsoever. Kakashi lowered his eyes to the page again. "Then Danzo died and Sandaime-sama investigated root basement to ceiling. And found nothing. A Jinchuriki can't just disappear," spat the sage, rapidly approaching the state of incandescent. "A Jinchuriki could. With a Namikaze Uzumaki seal that completely cut off all demonic chakra, and a clan head that had more heart than brains, and Inoichi was not stupid, so that was a fuckton of heart, a Jinchuriki could disappear almost completely, leaving behind a pain in the arse, run-of-the-mill clan kid. God damn it." Jiraiya grated out. He dragged a fist over his face. For about half a second Kakashi considered hinting. And then he realized that if Jiraiya ever found out, that would be the end of it. He would force the truth out. He would strip Yoshi off of Naruto regardless of how much it would hurt the boy and his family, and he would force Naruto into the Jinchuriki mold, because that was what Jiraiya had accepted as his debt to Namikaze Minato. Kakashi had his own debts, and his own heart, sad, shriveled thing that it was, so he stared glumly into the distance, and didn't say a word. Shikaku's opinion that a month was far too long a break between the second and the third stage of the Chunin exams was reinforced once again when he found the genin that should have been training loitering around the Hokage tower. He had a distinctly bad feeling about it even before Inoichi's son opened his mouth. "I agree with you, that should definitely be investigated. But maybe we could first ask Dash. For yet another fucking runaround?" barked Sakura, loudly enough to attract attention from half of the street. Jiraiya-sama and Tsunade-sama, who were following a few steps behind Shikaku, Choza and Inoichi, paused in their quiet conversation to watch. Don't look at me like that, Sakura-chan. Chided Yoshi. I agree that it's totally weird somebody let an S-class nuke infiltrate not just the village, but also the exams themselves. This village can't take care of its trash. Snapped Sasuke. It's not even the first time I've been targeted inside Konoha by an insane S-class shinobi. Laying it on a bit thick, huh? But it seemed to be working, considering the killing intent behind Shikaku's back. I didn't even know that boy had the emotional capacity to get angry, Shikaku remarked. Inoichi watched the performance like a teacher intending to grade it afterwards. Yoshi's been doing very well by him. Implying that his barely teenage son had done better than a line of trained professionals. Which would have been hubris if it weren't true. Shikaku was, however, momentarily occupied with observing an infinitely more interesting triumph of the Yamanaka children over people's issues. Jiraiya-sama's face screwed up in pain and anger. It was not widely known, but during those years he had spent maintaining Konoha's spy network, his primary motivation had been keeping tabs on his treacherous former teammate. Those who were in the know just hoped that Jiraiya-sama did not feel the need to try and rehabilitate Orochimaru. Certainly, murdering the Sandaime would have been the final nail in that coffin. Tsunade-sama looked about the same as ever, which was less drunk than she really was. With the small additional detail that her fists were tightly clenched. Your children lit the fire under someone's arse, Shikaku noted quietly. I wonder if they timed it like this on purpose, muttered Chuza, arms crossed in front of his chest. He watched the Toad Sage gravely. Inoichi scoffed. Of course, they did. That he inclined his head toward the two enraged Sannin. Was the whole point. The crash reverberated through the entire Hokage tower. A group of panicked ANBU and other assorted ninja invaded the Hokage's office, and Tsunade stared back at them, arms akimbo, silently daring them to say a single fucking word about the Hokage's desk half embedded in the wall. Out, she hissed, of my office. Most of them went without arguing about the semantics, which she took as sheer self-preservation on their parts. Only the few who were above such things as fear for their lives remained behind. Had you decided to accept the nomination, then? Asked Jiraiya. Tsunade could tell he wanted to rub his hands together in glee. So, she threw the letter in his direction, letting it flutter to the floor halfway between them. It pleased her to see him have to crouch to pick it up. Read that. Jiraiya read it. His face went pink, then red, and then an unhealthy puce color. What the shit? That's what I thought, agreed Tsunade. So, tell me, which one of us is going to declare war on the land of rice paddies? Because we will declare that war, rather than allow that snake back inside this village. You! Jiraiya yelled. You make the declarations, Haim. He ambled over, and made a pathetic attempt at puppy eyes. Look, I'll even go in the field and be your general. Anything you want. Just free me from this cage. This was the perfect time to make some demand about Jiraiya ceasing to sexually harass her, and other women, but primarily her, but Tsunade honestly just wanted Orochimaru's head on a pike. Fine. She growled, and took a swig directly from the bottle. Yes. Yes, oh sweet Cammy, thank you, yes. He tried to kiss her, and she gave him the satisfaction of a kiss with her fist. It embedded him in the wall right above the desk. The result looked like one of those surrealist paintings. Nara. Tsunade bellowed. The Jounin commander peeled himself off the wall. Oh, you're here. Never mind. You've heard then. Short version, Orochimaru stated his intention to honor Konoha with his visit in his capacity as the Otokage to watch the third stage of the Chunin exams. To which I say, fuck him with a morning star. Yes, I am aware that response equals a declaration of war. Ask me if I care. She paused for another gulp of sake, and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Come on, ask me. As you say, Godame-sama, replied the cool bastard with the imperturbable snark. Yeah, I know, Tsunade admitted and sighed. Fuck knows I'm going to look stupid in the hat. Everybody looked stupid in the hat. Because they were. Everybody who put it on was a goddamn idiot. You'll look beautiful, Jiraiya croaked from the hole in the wall, but he was obviously concussed, so his opinion didn't count. Irika finished laughing at his own story long after Kakashi gave up on his half-hearted attempt at a chuckle. And that was it. Irika wasn't going to pretend that everything was fine any longer. He passed Kakashi another beer and asked, "Will you tell me what's bothering you?" Ma, Kakashi rubbed at the back of his head, and for a moment it seemed like he would enforce a change of subject. Then he took a sip of the beer through the, presumably genjutsu mask. Secrets. Obligations. That feeling you get when you have to choose between two loyalties. He smiled widely and mirthlessly. You know what I mean. Guilt, Irika translated. Regret or remorse or some variation of the theme. We are shinobi, he said. Keeping secrets is what we do. Even when we hurt people who don't deserve it? Irika, sadly, was cruel enough to reply, especially then. Or perhaps it wasn't cruelty, perhaps it was self-reflection. He had not told Kakashi that dating him was an assignment, and since Kakashi was an elite jounin, there was no way of telling if he knew. Sometimes we burn ourselves with our own will of fire, but it's better than letting the fire go out. He wanted to smack himself for the cheesiness, but once he had said it, he couldn't take it back and not come across as a complete moron. Kakashi didn't laugh at him. He took another long, contemplative pull from the bottle, and then something in his posture reset completely. So, Sensei, you were telling me about Sarutobi-kun's cronies? Sakura ran up over the roofs just as the gathered procession began to move toward the southern gate. Her hair was still wet, but the weather was warm, so she wasn't worried about catching a cold. What's going on? She demanded. She braked, but the shingle didn't give her enough traction. She was about to catch herself by channeling chakra when Sasuke's hand struck out and gripped her belt to stabilize her. Thanks. Sasuke said predictably, and let go. Story goes, Ino spoke, that they found the Kazekage's body, and it looks like he's been dead for at least a month. The Genin team from Suna are his kids. They're getting recalled. There's some questions about succession and, well, it might result in a civil war, Shikamaru filled in. The Suna group walked down the street under the roof the rookies had commandeered, with the three San siblings in the center. The blonde? Yoshi asked quietly. She is attractive, don't you think? Ino whispered back. Sakura looked down. To her the girl, Temari, had seemed strong and skilled and quick to anger. That in itself was probably enough to make her attractive to some. Sakura personally didn't feel it. She's just your type, snarked Shikamaru. That's about as close as you can get to dating yourself. Nah, Ino snarked back. The closest would be dating Yoshi. Sakura concurred. Ino and Yoshi were very different people, but in some ways, they were exactly the same. Chuji choked on nothing. A dash. Ino punched him in the back. You do remember we're not actually related? At least not closely enough for it to matter. I'm sure Inoichi-san never specified that, mused Shikamaru. Most people simply assume that Yoshi is the child of Inoichi-san's mistress. The what? Ino screeched. Shikamaru shrugged. Not like it's unusual for clan heads. Most don't legitimize those kids, though, so he's still coming off as the good guy. Ino theatrically moaned and put her free arm, the one that wasn't holding a mortified Hinata, around Sakura's waist so she could flop down onto Sakura's shoulder almost as though she was using a Yamanaka-jutsu, scattering a very pretty waterfall of blonde hair. It's ridiculous that I have to specify this, but Yoshi is not my blood brother. Yoshi shrugged when they stared at him, grinning and admitting to nothing. Wait. Kiba yelped. What do you mean he's not your blood brother? Yoshi-kun's and not? Ami turned wide eyes to her two teammates, who looked just as clueless. I thought you were twins. Hanabi-chan and I attended your joint birthday celebrations, Hinata said quietly. Ino raised her head to glare, pointedly away from Hinata's direction which, coming from Ino, was kind of a sweet gesture. We're just not. Kiba shrank. So did the entire Team 3. Shikamaru didn't. I know that, he said, seemingly distracted by the clouds. Ino rounded on him, almost wrenching Sakura's shoulder in the process, and Sakura kicked her ankle in retaliation. Then why did you say that shit about thinking Yoshi's illegitimate? Shikamaru shrugged. I said most people think so. I don't. Mum described in nightmarish detail what Yuki-san would have done to Inoichi-san if it were true, and he's still got all his limbs, so. Chuji nodded. Yoshinobu-san went on an epic tear. I think that one jounin from the TNI was taking notes. He shuddered. When all eyes turned to Shikamaru with a mute question, he shrugged again. Mum can get enthusiastic. There was a while of silence. The Suna procession passed out of sight, and the spectators down in the street and on the other roofs around started dispersing. A few of the rookie 12 looked like they would have liked to go too, only nobody wanted to be the first to leave. Switch, Ino breathed into Sakura's ear. Conditioned by ears of responding to that word spoken in that tone, Sakura went under, and then back up. The momentary vertigo receded, and because this was not a good time to go and lick Sasuke-kun's delectable face from the tip of his chin to the delicate swirl of his pretty ear, she turned to the girls instead. While we're all here, I've got to know. Tell the truth. Who was in Sasuke's fan club but actually liked Yoshi better? Just to scope out the true, die-hard competition for the Uchiha family jewels. Yoshi actually tried to protest. Sakura dash. Shut the fuck up, Sakura ordered him softly. Yoshi did shut up, but it was probably because of the forest of hands that rose rather than because Sakura told him to. Oh, very good. That actually pretty much cleared the way, and considering that Ino had moved on as well, Sakura just had to keep an eye on any new interlopers. Sasuke stared too, although rather than shocked he looked pissed off. I had to endure years of harassment because they all had a crush on you? He was lucky Ino was maintaining her hold around Sakura's waist, otherwise, Sakura would have been on him already, showing him what harassment actually meant. And he would have liked it. Yoshi frowned. Sasuke, Ino and I intervened whenever anybody crossed the lines of harassment. And if you try to tell anybody you didn't want to be admired, Sakura will laugh at you. I will, Sakura promised him, already chuckling, because Sasuke's expression invited her to. And also because she could vividly imagine his face if she ripped off his shirt and tongue-fucked his belly button. That would be hilarious. For a moment Sasuke just pretended that he had never been a part of the conversation, and then he body flickered away. Sakura enjoyed herself. Polite Sakura, however, was going to ask Yoshi to deface Ino's favorite book for this. The third stage of the Chunin exams did not significantly differ from the matches at the end of the second stage. If anything, it was more boring, because almost all the contestants were from Konoha, and no maiming was expected. The turnout of spectators was disappointing too. Sakura sat between Yoshi and Ino, who were shouting loud and unnecessary encouragements. There was a little bit of screaming, but mostly there were crunching and squelchy wet noises. A few people in the audience vomited. Sakura turned over a page and went on reading. She was not especially interested in embalming techniques, but she had purposely selected a book that she did not need to focus on. This way she had the capacity to follow what was happening down in the arena. Did Hinata-chan just rip someone into pieces with her bare hands? Asked Yoshi. Said Sasuke, although he sounded worryingly enthusiastic. Sakura raised her head and checked on the surprise maiming that had just transpired. No, of course not. She used chakra scalpels for the really tough bits. Ino's jaw fell. You taught her chakra scalpels? She asked, Sakura said, maybe a little defensively. She's got the control for it. And she uses them impressively. She shrugged, looked down at her book and quietly added, you were busy with genjutsu training for the finals, and Tomomi Bie-san supervised. Thanks, Sakura-chan, Ino said and kissed her cheek. Sakura grinned. It was my absolute pleasure, Ino-chan. In the row above and below them, the other spectators suddenly found pressing reasons to move further away, and then yet further as Hinata returned from her match, liberally bloodstained. Sakura pulled out a box of alcohol wipes and a dry soap. Shino automatically rose to help Hinata clean up. An impressive performance, Ladybug. Thank you, Shino-kun, she replied, smiling wildly. I believe Kiba-kun feels sufficiently vindicated. I love you, Kiba professed unashamedly. But next time let's do this instead of neutralization when we identify a traitor, and not wait until they defeat me in the preliminaries, okay? He offered his hand for a fist bump. Sakura wondered how many people had actually found that it had been a spy rather than Orochimaru himself that had killed the previous Hokage. If Kiba knew, either he was better connected than he seemed, or he had somehow earned Hinata's trust. Hinata, blushing and looking at the floor, returned the fist bump, leaving Kiba's knuckles blood-stained. Oh okay. The strangers moved yet further away. Neji stared for close to a full minute. Then he averted his face. I did not ask for Hinata-sama's mercy. And yet Lee paused, searching for the right words. Somewhat less than youthful, Flower of Konoha clearly deemed you worthy of it, my rival. I would have preferred If you say death is better than loss in a competition, Tenten said with threat clear in her tone, I'll tell Guy-sensei, and you know he would There is no point to therapy, Neji interrupted her before they went over the entire well-rehearsed performance. What must happen shall happen, and all who labor under the illusion of free will are fools. There is not hope, and yet they persist in peddling this lie and calling it healing I'm going to go congratulate your cousin, Tenten cut him off. You stay here and stew. Lee? Please lead the way, my most youthful teammate. I too wish to convey my appreciation of the amazing power in the hands of Konoha's blossoms. Yash. Is it just me, asked Kiba, or does that green guy keep talking about Bleach Boy? It's just you, Ino assured him. Lee-san is a very optimistic ninja, Hinata-chan said, tracking the boy's progress through the audience. She seemed fascinated. Ino was a little surprised, but mostly curious about how this would go. With the exception of Yoshi, who was universally liked and never paid much attention to it, Hinata had not ever before shown interest in any boy. On the other hand, Lee had proven himself to be exceptional when his reaction to Ino kicking his arse in the finals, with Genjutsu, because she was forewarned and not suicidal, was to earnestly congratulate and unself-consciously compliment her. That reaction from an older boy, who by rights should have been all injured ego after a defeat from a younger girl, was impressive. A graceful loser as well as a graceful winner, he had been nice to Chuji after kicking his arse in the preliminaries, even offered to spar with him. Ino would keep an eye on him, of course, but she was not opposed to letting Hinata spend more time with him. The Yash thing? Yoshi was saying to Kiba, and then laughed. He leaned closer and lowered his voice to a confidential tone. When I learned to talk, properly talk, in whole sentences, I used to have a verbal tic. Mom helped me unlearn it, but sometimes when I feel really relaxed, it tries to come back. I haven't actually said it in years, but sometimes I kinda have to bite down on it. That's crazy, Sakura deadpanned. Concurred Sasuke-kun. Yep, Yoshi agreed easily. But saying Yash is better than a whole lot of other things. Take Ino, for instance. She would seem so much more polite if she substituted Yash for every four-letter word . And you'd go paranoid thinking I'm talking about you all the time, Ino retorted, and also jabbed him in the side for being sanctimonious. "Yash!" exclaimed Lee. Yoshi did actually reflexively react to the address, which was so funny, and bowed to Hinata-chan. "Congratulations on your excellent fight." Hinata went red. Kakashi pouted, thankfully, behind the book and the mask nobody could tell. He had been looking forward to those kenjutsu lessons. And now Sakura was wielding chakra blades with enough proficiency to teach them to somebody else, and he had actually gone through all that trouble to draft lesson plans for her. He would know better next time. No drafting lessons plans ever again. He would leave that sort of thing to Irika, and then distract him whenever a good opportunity came up. Yep, that sounded a lot more enjoyable. "What did you do to them?" Irika demanded. "Actually," Kakashi said despondently, "they were like that when you gave them to me." "No, they weren't." Irika-sensei?" Yoshi-kun raised his hand like they were still in class. "We really were." But Irika knew enough about Yamanaka Yoshi that he was not overly surprised by anything the boy pulled out, but this was the first time he had seen Sasuke-kun crack a smile since his family died, and it was in reaction to seeing someone murdered in a fashion that made Irika gag, and then, "Sakura-chan?" he asked, bemused and angry. What had happened to that lovely, polite girl? Sakura shrugged and turned to Yoshi. "See? This is the reason why I never let hot Sakura out in the academy. Except sometimes in taijutsu practice," Sasuke pointed out. Sakura shrugged again. "Ami and Keiko were asking for it. Besides, where do you think I've learned exactly how to kick you in the kidneys so you piss blood for a week?" Irika blinked, feeling despair creep upon him. He wished he could ask Kakashi for reassurance, but Kakashi was, sometimes hilariously, bad at reassuring people. So he turned to Yoshi instead, and was gifted with a sunshiny smile. "Don't worry, Irika-sensei. We won't break your boyfriend." Irika's jaw sank. He felt himself sinking as well, deeper into the well of despair. Was this an enemy's genjutsu? Sakura leaned closer to her blonde teammate and whispered into his ear. Yoshi affected a faux embarrassed expression. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know we weren't supposed to notice, just forget I said anything." He smiled widely. It almost worked. Irika turned to Kakashi. Kakashi briefly glanced over the top of his book, conveying that he was blameless in this, and also that the kids might plausibly be the death of him one of these days. "Does that count as pranking, sensei?" Yoshi whispered. "You're reaching," Sasuke grumbled dismissively. "It counts as making sensei uncomfortable," concluded Sakura, "and, honestly, that's enough of an achievement that I'm going to celebrate." "Recreational drugs and exploding seals, anyone?" Yoshi whooped. "Let's." They were gone before Irika moved to stop them. Kakashi had not even tried, and when Irika leveled him an accusing look, he simply closed his book, stashed it away, and shrugged. "It's not like they'll blow up any infrastructure. By now they're good at keeping it to the training grounds." Yes. This was what Irika meant by Kakashi being bad at reassurance. Chapter 20, Fool Me Twice. Yoshinobu-san stepped up to the center of the dais, surveyed the line of genin hopefuls standing in front of her, and then scoffed. "This fills me with confidence," Sakura whispered dryly. "Wonder which Noob-nin will attack this fucking shindig." Naruto could feel the disaster brew, so he decided to risk it. Just as Yoshinobu-san began to speak. "Shinobi of the village hidden in leaves, we are about dash." He leaned close to Sakura and whispered in her ear, "Switch. To witness the promotion of the following genin shinobi to the rank of Chunin. They have proven that they deserve this rank in the standard examinations to the satisfaction of their proctors." Sakura went pale and began to shiver. Ino glared at Naruto. What was their problem? Sakura had nothing to be nervous about. She knew she wasn't getting promoted. What was the big issue? At least this way she wouldn't attack anyone or start shouting obscenities. "When I call your name," announced Yoshinobu-san, "step forward and accept your promotion and your Chunin vest." Aburame Shino. One of the Chunin who had helped with seeding the intel during the written exam came over to hand the vest to Shino, shake his hand, which Shino accepted with ill grace, and mutter a congratulation under Yoshinobu-san calling out, "Uchiha Sasuke." The same process repeated with a different Chunin, also one they had met during the exams, and maybe also as part of the wall guard detail. Nara Shikamaru. "Troublesome," Shikamaru said predictably, avoiding looking at his, very obviously proud, mum up on the dais. Yamanaka Ino. Ino squealed. Naruto flinched and covered his ear. He hadn't known she made that noise. When he turned to glare at her, she had her hand clapped over her mouth and was turning red, so he laughed at her instead. Sakura finally relaxed a little and then promptly started sniffling, as if Ino was getting married rather than promoted. Around them all the other genin, especially Hinata-chan, wilted. On one hand, Naruto firmly believed that Hinata-chan had the hard skills to be a Chunin. On the other hand, she did not have the ability to lead, and if the war that the older ninja whispered about really was coming, a higher rank could get her killed. Yamanaka Yoshi. Naruto beamed. And, as he stepped forwards, there came the cinch, Rock Lee. "We should celebrate," Inoichi exclaimed. He had of course known that both his children were skilled, but seeing them pass the Chunin exams at first try after mere 6 months of geninhood filled him to bursting with glee, and he needed a chance to get it all out before he resorted to publicly embarrassing them with random bursts of pride. "Yes," Yoshi agreed excitedly, punching the air. "No," moaned Ino. "I don't want a big party." She looked at the empty side of the sofa for just a moment, but both Inoichi and Yoshi saw Yuki not sitting there. Well, yes, it would have been odd to celebrate without Yuki. The children had refused birthday parties too, if she wasn't home for them. "You just don't want to have to tidy up afterwards," Yoshi accused his sister playfully, nudging her shoulder. "Yeah," Ino agreed. "And I don't want to see the lazy lumps before I have to. The best part of the Chunin exams was no team training." Yoshi put his arm around her shoulder, and they bumped their blonde heads together. Inoichi wondered if that was something he should look into, but his children were independent people, and if they wanted help, they could ask for it. He wasn't going to butt in without invitation. "Let's cook dinner together and gorge on sugar until we can't move," suggested Inoichi, which earned him a double glump and excited agreements. He put his arms around his two hellions and distributed kisses to the tops of their heads. Suddenly he was faced with two upturned smirks. Ino blinked mock-innocently. "Poker night, Daddy?" Chuji hated it when Ino got angry, and lately Ino was angry every time Chuji saw her. He knew that Team 10 was the main problem, but even though he tried to help, nothing he did had any effect. He had asked Asuma-sensei too, but Asuma-sensei explained to him that before he would give any one of them any truly strong techniques, he needed to be sure that they would not use those techniques against one another. So now they waited in a sort of limbo filled with shogi and the occasional C-rank to break up the boredom, until Asuma-sensei made up his mind. At least so it seemed to him. Obviously, neither Ino nor Shikamaru nor Chuji would ever seriously hurt any of the other two, and they would probably die to defend the others, but how were you supposed to prove something like that? Especially to someone that had been out of the village for many years and hadn't seen them grow up together? "I don't really want to disband the team," Asuma-sensei said at the first team meeting after Shikamaru and Ino were promoted. "The council would tear me a new one, and Chuji-kun can pass the next Chunin exams anyway. You'll catch up to Dash. He won't if you don't actually start training us." Ino snapped. "I get that you think we'll all get training at home, and you'll get a free ride, but Dash." "Whoa." Asuma-sensei raised his hands, looking shocked. "Hey, Ino-chan, when have I ever neglected your training?" Chuji cringed. This was going to end in a bloodbath. Even Shikamaru was eyeing a nearby tree like he was tempted to climb up into relative safety, regardless of the effort involved. "Name a single thing you taught us," demanded Ino. "A bunch of chakra exercises for your elemental affinities," Sensei replied off the top of his head. "Water walking, but I guess you already knew that?" "A couple of ciphers, the basics of Konoha hand signs, and how to recognize when you're supposed to forget the shinobi code and use common sense instead. Look, it's not my fault if you don't want to work with your teammates dash. My teammates and I used to work together all the fucking time before you came along. We suffered through years and years of enforced cooperation, only for you to split us apart and turn us against each other dash. So, you won't mind if I send you 3 out alone for survival training?" Asuma-sensei inquired, pulling out a cigarette. Choji thought that was a stupid question. They had gone through the forest of death together, hadn't they? And, before, on that sea rank that brought them north into the mountains when they met those grass ninja, they had worked together without problems. Maybe they didn't enjoy spending so much time together, but it was easy to rely on one another. Choji sort of liked it. "It beats watching you lose at shogi," Ino replied, arms crossed in front of her chest, mouth turned downward. Shikamaru shook his head. "That won't work. Ino hates me." Choji opened his mouth to protest, but then he realized that he had no clue what Shika was talking about. He only knew it wasn't survival training. "I don't hate you." Ino turned to him. "I dislike you, and I wouldn't trust you with anybody's well-being, but neither of that has any bearing on our professional cooperation." Then she whirled back to yell some more at Asuma-sensei. "And did you seriously enter us into the Chunin exams to make us prove that we can work together?" "In my defense," said Asuma-sensei in that flat tone that falsely implied he didn't care, "I've seen you refuse to train with Choji repeatedly dash." "Yes, because I need taijutsu practice, and Choji still can't even pretend to hit a girl worth a damn." Choji's breath caught. He knew, he had known that was a problem. He did. But he just couldn't help it. Girls were small and fragile and pretty, and he just couldn't do it. Even when he knew they were tough, vicious pieces of work like Ino. Ino sniffed. "Go save your arse, sensei. Don't split the team. Why do something that might benefit us if it would result in trouble for you?" She turned on her heel and strode off down the path to the village. Choji didn't even think about it, he ran after her. He caught up to her at the edge of the training field and jogged alongside her, since Ino had long legs and could walk really fast when she was mad. "What did Shika do?" he asked. Ino shook her head and slowed down a little for him. "He's a horse's arse, let's leave it at that." "So, Chunin, huh?" Kakashi said, turning over a page of his second least favorite Ika book. Every time he managed to convince himself that ninja pirate queens were worth slogging through seafood metaphors used in sex scenes, he regretted it. Sasuke did not raise his head from his own reading. Kakashi should have known better than to expect a response to anything less than a direct question spoken in a tone that conveyed the implicit order to answer. He so hated being direct, but with a team consisting of the uncommunicative Sasuke, the hyper-communicative Yoshi and the plain contrary Sakura, Kakashi often found himself without another recourse. There was a truism Irika liked to comfort himself with: by teaching the teacher learns as much than the students do. Kakashi would not say he had learnt as much, but he had definitely overcome some unique obstacles. "You are eligible to claim your clan headship. Is that something you intend to do?" "Not at this time," Sasuke answered, thus confirming that Kakashi's tone had been sufficiently authoritative. "Any future plans?" Kakashi inquired. This time the tone was clearly not sufficiently authoritative, since Sasuke's response amounted to HN. Kakashi slumped further in the chair he had appropriated. He listened to the rustling of paper and thought fondly of Minato-sensei, who must have been at least a minor deity to somehow manage a 13-year-old Kakashi. 13-year-old Kakashi had been arguably worse than 13-year-old Sasuke. He had certainly been less interested in teamwork and completely unwilling to acknowledge that he was the last living member of a clan. Since self-reflection was about the worst manner of wasting one's time, Kakashi decided to do something constructive instead. "I can teach you to use your elemental affinity to blow fist-sized holes into people's ribcages," he mentioned casually. Sasuke sighed and, after a moment that was presumably spent praying for patience, looked over. He did not seem quite as impressed as he rightly should have been. Why not? There might be some way of adapting the jutsu into something actually useful. Had Kakashi mentioned that he hated his team? Choji came back from his talk with Ino completely disheartened. He relayed a little of what they talked about, but he didn't seem to want to converse. He just took some pleasure in repeating the words Ino had used to describe Shikamaru. Shikamaru slumped, groaned, squinted at Choji. What? Said Choji. "You want me to tell you that you don't sometimes act like a horse's hindquarters?" "Can't argue with the truth," admitted Shikamaru. It was his fault, after all. His stupid brain, sure, he thought fast and put stuff together, but whenever people called him a genius, they forgot about the downsides? Side effects? Like overfocusing. Tunnel vision. He had been so fixated on the idea of breaking up this team, and maybe forming a new one that would include Yoshi, that he had forgotten how Choji and Ino would feel about his actions. Manipulating Asuma had been fun. Shikamaru absolutely understood why the Yamanaka enjoyed lying to people, but maybe he should have stopped when he saw Ino's frustration mounting over the months. "The things Asuma-sensei thinks about us," Choji started and didn't finish. Shikamaru sighed. That was the curse of having smart teammates. They could see through you, even if it was a little too late. He made it easy. He cringed when he heard himself. He sounded just like a 6-year-old Ino. "That's not an excuse," protested Choji, and then looked at Shikamaru the way he had looked at him after Shikamaru broke his friendship with Yoshi. And that hurt. Maybe even worse than it had hurt last time, because this time Shikamaru knew it was honestly deserved. Naruto made sure to knock before he let himself into Ino's room. It would have been locked if she hadn't wanted him there, so the door opening was a good sign. The drapes were pulled over the window and the door to the terrace. There was barely any light inside. Ino was lying in her bed next to a mostly empty box of chocolates clearly pilfered from their mum's special stash. "Heard stuff kinda blew up," Naruto said, sitting down onto Ino's soft carpet. Ino opened her eyes. She looked like she would throw up all the chocolate if she moved too fast rather than in danger of blowing up again emotionally. "Stupid Asuma." "Stupid Shikamaru," Naruto retorted and sighed. "I heard about it from Choji. And you know that if Choji grasses up Shikamaru, it means he fucked up badly." "Choji wouldn't," Ino protested. "I'd have thought so too, but he did. So, what we need to do is plan revenge on Shikamaru for being a horse's arse, plan revenge on Asuma for being stupid and lazy, and dash. Remember that mold that spread in Great Uncle Hyde's cellar?" Ino cut him off. Naruto took a moment to recalibrate and then nodded. It was hard to forget. Yamanaka were the best at dealing with plants, after Mokutan users, of whom there were a whole lot of one in the world, and that one was a fairly well-kept ANBU secret, but they didn't manage to kill that mold, and in the end it spread so far they had to dismantle the whole house, burn the base, sterilize the ground, and rebuild from the bottom up. Tomomi Bachan kept a bit for research. She said it might be good for medicine. Or poison. Then she grinned. Or architectural warfare, I guess. Naruto laughed. "Where did you put it?" "Shikamaru's bedroom, of course. Under his bed. Izanagi, you wouldn't believe it, it's like he never cleans. But I had some left over, so I did Fate Boy's bedroom too." Naruto nearly fell over during the resulting giggle fit. His sister had once again shown off her huge balls of steel. How did she not get caught? Weren't Hyugas supposed to be, like, impossible to sneak up on? Did she recruit Hinata to help? That was glorious. Why did he have to be a Hyuga? Ino whined, rolling over to her side and unwrapping the gold foil from another chocolate. He's hot, but no amount of hotness is worth getting embroiled in that clan's bullshit. There, Ikamatsu-chan. Naruto patted her knee. I'm sure some crazy boy will turn up, ready to be swept off his feet by you. Or girl, Ino pointed out. Naruto rather doubted that, since Ino was tragically straight, for all that she professionally portrayed herself as open to all options. For instance, Naruto was fairly sure those stories she had told him about the San Kunoichi were true. She had, fortunately, shared very few details. But those few sounded authentic enough to him. If you say so, he said, shrugging one shoulder. Hey! Ino protested. Naruto laughed and dodged her half-hearted kick. So, the reason why you haven't collared and leashed Hinata-chan is that she's a Hyuga, not that you're ultimately not attracted to her that way? It was a good thing too, otherwise, he would have had to kick his sister's arse for unethical conduct. Even though Hinata was not officially her patient anymore, the power imbalance remained, and starting a romance at this point would be more than a little icky. As far as he could tell, Ino and Hinata were playing up their closeness for shits and giggles. Neither of them seemed sure what she wanted out of a real relationship, but both were enjoying the reactions of the people around them too much to stop. It also had the side effect of acclimatizing Hinata to being subject to scrutiny, specifically for her romantic entanglements. One day when she found someone for real, this experience would be invaluable to her. The goal is to make Hinata-chan better, Ino lamented. And make her better in Ino's opinion meant make her boring. But the Hyuga thing definitely wasn't helping. Alright, girly. Yamanaka squared like you, so you come recommended. Show me what ya got, said Anko-san, pulling one of her discarded dango sticks out of the tree into which she had stuck it, and wielding it instead of a proper weapon. Sakura nodded timidly. She eyed the pointy tip of the dango stick, a little intimidated but determined to make a good showing. Oh, wait, said Anko-san. I want to see the other one. Switch. Sakura blinked. Then shook her head. That trick works for only two people in the world dash. She deliberately let the spark of fury catch. There was the familiar falling and rising sensation, and Sakura's smile widened into a grin. Bitch. Sasuke and Sakura were both as stable and busy as Naruto could make them, and he couldn't start working on Kakashi, because there were already 3 other people there and any conditioning he might try could mess up their, mostly amateur, but still fairly solid, efforts. The whole exams debacle was finally over with as few casualties as there could be, and Dad had managed to procure the copy of Uzumaki Nido-sama's notes. No, Naruto had not silently screamed into his pillow as soon as his bedroom door was shut. Not at all. So, this was the ideal time to start working on a project that he had kept on a back burner for ages. When Kurama opened an eye, there was a little yellow and blue worm-like thing sitting cross-legged on the other side of the bars and watching him. Oh, good morning, the thing said cheerfully. Kurama rose on his forelegs, pulled in a deep, lung-expanding breath, and roared hard enough to flatten the little worm against the floor of the mine dungeon. The worm remained curled up for a moment and then sat up straight again. An odious smile affixed itself on its face. So, not a good morning then. I get you. The accommodations suck. Kurama roared again. The worm-like thing was back, frustratingly unafraid. Smiling again. No teeth, clever prey. Kurama would kill and eat it, if he weren't imprisoned inside it. I asked Dad, it said, and he told me that we could make this place suck less. You up for trying? I'm going to fucking devour you, vermin, Kurama replied, wishing keenly that it were in his power to go through with the threat. And wishing yet more keenly that he hadn't spoken, and thus revealed his capacity for speech. There went his chance to pretend that he was a primitive manifestation of chakra, and spare himself the onus of dealing with another sage-damned human. The worm shrugged. It must have known it was safe for now. So, not yet. Or, do you just like this sort of ambience? Did you get dropped on your head a lot? Kurama snapped before he thought better of it. Why couldn't he just keep his mouth shut? Was the thing really too irritating for him to maintain self-control? The fuck do you mean about your father? I know for a fact the worm got itself killed. I was adopted, it said cheerfully. It's too early in the millennium for this. Kurama curled up, piled his tails on top of his head, and went to sleep. Hi, Demon-san. Fuck off and die. Okay, see you tomorrow. I think I figured it out. Kurama, startled from his sleep, thought a few things he would not have been able to put into words due to the limits of human language, and lifted two strategically placed tails so he could glare at his jailer. How to release the seal. How to make this place livable, said the thing, for once not smiling. It radiated sincerity. It should not have been possible to radiate sincerity, but it somehow managed to create the effect. Let's try, yeah? How do you feel about flowers? I love flowers. I love all kinds of plants. You would, Kurama grumbled under his breath, and because there was nothing he could actually do about it, he resigned himself to having his prison redesigned against his will. Ino found Yoshi on the Engawa, sprawled in the narrow rectangle of sunlight. His eyes were closed and his breathing even, like he had just dropped off. While trying to read, there was what looked like a handwritten book in his hands, so she wasn't surprised at all. Have you caught the lazy idiot, brother? She demanded. He would fit right in with the Nara. I am playing checkers, sisterer, he informed her calmly. The rhythm of his breathing barely changed. This was weird. Your eyes are closed, Ino pointed out. You're playing checkers like Shikamaru watches clouds. Shikamaru does actually watch clouds. It relaxes him. Of course, Yoshi would know that. He was doomed. Doomed. So, yeah, you're right. Alright, now she was intrigued. He wasn't just messing with her, that was clear, but Ino still couldn't believe that her hyperactive, attention span challenged brother would manage to play an entire game of anything but tic-tac-toe without having it in his face, obscuring the view of everything else. You're playing checkers against yourself inside your head? You don't have that kind of memory. Well, no, and I'd have preferred poker, but you can't really honestly randomize mental card shuffling, so that was a no-go. Still, I've got this weird headspace and a really grumpy opponent, so I'm going to stop talking to you now and focus on the game, before he gets all crabby old man again. I'm getting trounced anyway, and he's not a graceful winner. He smiled. Ni, Ino. Ino left him to it. He would tell her about whatever weird psychological experiment he was conducting later. It was only a matter of time before Team 3 ran into Team 7 at the mission's desk. Sasuke-kun, predictably, ignored them, and Sakura-chan merely waved in their direction before she engaged the chunin behind the desk in a whispered argument. Their sensei did not raise his eyes from his book. Yoshi-kun, however, seemed utterly delighted. Hello, Kunoichi-san. How are you all doing? We're fine, Yoshi-kun, Fuyumi-chan assured him, smiling. That was a miracle in itself. Keiko couldn't remember the last time Fuyumi-chan had smiled unless she was looking at something sharp and pointy. Or at good food in large quantities. Right, Keiko agreed. It's funny. I think the bugs are sort of starting to be all right. I mean, some days I even forget they're there, until one crawls over my hand. You too? Ami-chan exclaimed. The other day I caught myself thinking they were sort of neat. Well, Keiko wouldn't have gone so far as to proclaim them neat, but that might have been because she was less susceptible to autosuggestion than Ami-chan. Or, alternately, because she wasn't so good at lying to get Yoshi-kun to pay attention to her. Neat was the exact word that Yoshi-kun had used when he had tried to cheer them up. That's so cool. Enthused Yoshi-kun. Did you see Shino in the exams? He totally kicked arse. They had, in fact, gone to watch the tournament. Shino-kun had been impressive, and his promotion was well-deserved. Makes sense, Ami-chan agreed. Shibi-sensei is weird. But he's Badars, Fuyumi-chan filled in. Shino, huh? Sakura-chan tugged on Yoshikuan's ponytail and waved a scroll at him to remind him that they were all here to be assigned a mission. Spreading the Aburame appreciation, without even knowing it, apparently. Yoshikuan gave Team 3 an apologetic look, and let his teammate drag him away. Is that a friend of my son? Inquired Shibi-sensei. Keiko thought it was odd and maybe a little sad too, that he had to ask. But if Shino-kun was anything like Shibi-sensei, they probably spent most of their time together in silence, and then it made sense that they wouldn't know a lot about one another. Ami-chan smiled widely and nodded. Yamanaka Yoshikuan. Shibi-sensei reflected upon the information for a moment, and then concluded, I see. Yamanaka Ino's brother. He is similar to his sister. Not too similar, said Keiko. Ino-chan may be the ruling queen, but Yoshikuan is everybody's friend. Shikamaru had catoned onto the fact that he had not thought this through, but the consequences were still unexpected. It didn't happen to him often, but this time it was absolutely clear that he had had no idea of what he would unleash when he messed with Asuma-sensei's perception of the team. He had done so well, too, he was sure that from an objective point of view Ino would have been impressed. Can't, Chuji told him stiffly. Sorry. I'm going out with other people and, he left it hanging, which was nicer than admitting they don't want to spend time with you. Shikamaru in turn did not say that it was odd to see Chuji suddenly so popular. Before, Chuji barely ever went anywhere unless it was with Shikamaru. Apparently Shikamaru was in for a lesson, Yamanaka style. Psychological torture and social warfare. Well, he said once the silence stretched too long and Chuji was beginning to look guilty, say hi to Yoshi for me. Chuji nodded. I will. Shikamaru remained alone to work on the plan to put all these things right again. He suspected it would take him at least as long as it took to wreck them. Chapter 21, Planting a Seed. Please, help. Shikamaru begged. On his knees. Because he was exhausted enough that sitting on his heels was a lot more comfortable than standing. Getting Yoshi on his own had been unexpectedly difficult. In the end he only managed it because Chuji took pity and agreed to play messenger. Shikamaru perhaps should have thought of something more practical than half an hour after sunset in the Nara forest, but he did not want Ino to catch a wind of this tete-a-tete. I am prepared to offer extensive bribes. Yoshi petted Fuki, who had split from the herd and come over to lick him as if he was made of rock salt. No threats? Shikamaru shuddered theatrically. I've met Inoichi-san. Yoshi stared at him for a moment and then scowled. The first step to self-improvement is admitting where you suck. Dad does not scare you. And trying to pretend like you're not scared of Mom just makes you look like an idiot. Only stupid people are not scared of Mom. She psyched out even the god of shinobi. Shikamaru swallowed. He was genuinely, well, wary was a weak word, but frightened didn't quite fit either. He was reasonably intimidated by Inoichi-san. Had been since that time in the izakaya, really. Yuki-san, on the other hand, was not often around, and Shikamaru had gotten far too used to discounting her in his plans. Stupid. That was the kind of mistake that would be fatal one of these days, and he was smarter than that. Yoshi stroked along Fuki's dappled neck, and then crossed his arms over his chest. On anyone else that gesture would have seemed defensive, but Yoshi simply threw it out as another challenge. So, bribes? I realize that there is very little I possess right now that would interest you, but I can help you get damn near anything you want. Yoshi blinked, slowly. His lashes looked white in the light of the first emerging stars, his irises shone eerie blue like will-o'-the-wisps luring a clueless passerby to his doom. Shikamaru reminded himself to breathe. Then Yoshi grinned and shook his head. So, you realized that there was no way to infiltrate Ino's circle of friends, and decided that the optimal strategy was to convert one of the people in your enemy's camp to your side? No wonder they call you a strategic genius. Shikamaru slumped and groaned. Now you're just making fun of me. Yes, I am. Yoshi laughed freely, all shaking shoulders and fluttering hair and glittering eyes. Shikamaru bit down on the troublesome that wanted to come out of his mouth, and accepted the mocking as his due. He waited until Yoshi got the hilarity out of his system, then he tried again. So, what would you recommend? Yoshi's smile twisted into a sour grimace. Yeah, no. I'm not doing your work for you. And before you start, yes, I helped Shino and Kiba and Ami, because they meant well but genuinely had no clue what they should do. You know. You're just too lazy and too afraid for your ego to go out there and admit that you were wrong and work to make up for it. Shikamaru startled at the sudden silence. His hands were clenched into fists on top of his thighs, bracing him against the onslaught of painful assessment, but all that he had heard up until now was what he had expected, and all of it was completely fair. So, what had stopped Yoshi? Yoshi had covered his mouth with his hand and seemed like he was biting down on something hard. He blinked a lot too, almost like he was trying to blink away tears. But why? That made no sense. He had been laughing just now. If anything, he should be angry. Shikamaru expected anger. This was supposed to be the place where Shikamaru would start making up for all the crap he had let pile up out of, well, yeah, laziness, and facing the anger and upset he had caused was a part of that. I'm sorry, said Yoshi, and that made no sense. I got carried away, and I shouldn't have you asked me for advice, and I promise that I can do better than this. Let me try again? What? Yoshi was still making zero sense. But you're right, Shikamaru protested. I am lazy, and I do hate to admit that I'm wrong, because being right damn near all the time is all I've got going for me. I took it personally, Yoshi cut in. I shouldn't have. I know better than that. Let me try again? Please? Oh, now Shikamaru understood. He had, without realizing it, managed to get under Yoshi's skin. This was Yoshi backpedaling until they were on impersonal ground again. No, Shikamaru snapped. He did regret that his way of getting under Yoshi's guard was painful. Why was it painful though? He would have to think about that more later. Now there wasn't time for it, but he did not regret that it happened. Knowing that he had that power, it was uplifting. And frightening. He had not deserved it, but that didn't mean that he did not treasure it. No. Yoshi repeated. He petted Fuki again and gently pushed her away. Fine. I'll see myself out. He strode away toward the edge of the Nara lands. Shikamaru let him go, because trying to stop him would probably result in Yoshi giving him a taste of Yuki-san's medicine, and Shikamaru needed all his faculties. He had a lot to do, and he had to avoid most of his usual methods, so this was going to be the biggest pain in the arse imaginable. Worth it though. Besides, Yoshi had already given him the advice Shikamaru had begged for. The gist of it was that Shikamaru could not fake it this time, he had to work to regain his team's trust. It would certainly be a novel experience. Just when I thought you might not be a complete waste of oxygen, you go and pull shit like this. The worm sniffled and wiped off its eyes. "'S just the pollen. We're in the middle of a flowering meadow if you missed it. I wish I could have. And I've got all sorts of allergies. 1. Having a bijou sealed in you negates all allergic reactions. 2. We're in your own sage-forgotten mindscape. 3. That crap could maybe fly if you had not been brought up in a flower shop. 4. Kurama belatedly realized what he was doing. He roared with indescribable aggravation, rolled over and buried himself under his tails. He was not anybody's sage-damned confidant. 4. Piped up the worm. Kurama sucker punched him with a tail. That was, he decided, pretty good advice anyway. "Hello, Team Kakashi," Irika said, smiling genially across the mission's desk. Their responses varied, from a sardonic lift of an eyebrow to a grin indicating that Irika's challenge was recognized and accepted. Kakashi continued staring out of the window as an exciting change from Ika, which had less to do with his sudden interest in the welfare of Konoha's population and more with the fact that Irika had managed to transfer the infamous orange cover onto a book of stone poetry from the Shodai's era, poetry which, predictably, consisted mostly of nostalgia for the clan wars and long-winded, unhealthy appreciation for rocks. Irika had a bet with himself about how long it would take Kakashi to incinerate that crime against literature, and he was already losing. He hoped it was because Kakashi intended to instate poetry reading as part of team training. "Good morning, Irika-sensei," Sakura said politely. She seemed like the same sweet girl she had been at the academy. Irika was still perplexed by her. Kakashi assured him that this was the real Sakura, but could it not be the effect of some obscure Yamanaka jutsu? Not that he suspected Yoshi of doing anything nefarious to her, but perhaps Sakura had consented to some alteration in a misguided effort to win Sasuke? The terrible thing was that, if Sakura truly had changed to capture Sasuke's attention, it was working. "Individual assignments for all of you today," Irika informed them, handing out scrolls and relishing the grumbles. He did not like feeling as though he had failed his mission. He was supposed to keep an eye on Team 7 via keeping an eye on Kakashi, and while the latter part went swimmingly, he had somehow fallen for the smokescreen of Kakashi's melodrama. Kakashi often complained about his students, but in such a way that he clearly was mocking himself. He had come across as a perpetually exasperated yet devoted teacher of a group of talented kids with a tendency to act out, which he pretended, badly, to not enjoy. Irika honestly had not expected that it was a case of the trio doing what they wanted and Kakashi trying to keep them alive, and in line through the authority of his position, and his ability to kick their insubordinate butts. Kakashi probably thought of his A-rank recon of a potential warfront, partnered with Asuma, as a relaxing vacation. "An exercise with Team 10? Sakura inquired, reading her scroll. Yoshi burst into laughter, and could not seem to stop. He went gradually redder and redder, until Sakura punched him in the stomach. He still made little hiccuping giggle-like sounds afterwards, but at least he calmed down a bit. "HN?" inquired Sasuke. Irika concurred. He had not expected a positive response to any of the assignments. He was particularly looking forward to the results of Sasuke substituting for Suzume-sensei at the academy. For a week, Ino's finally managed to argue Asuma-sensei into teaching Chuji to get over his chivalry, Yoshi explained. And if Ino didn't manage to break Chuji off that vice herself, then Sakura's the only one with a chance before they have to pull out the big guns. "By big guns you mean Anko-sensei?" Sakura inquired. Irika blanched. "Anko-sensei? When had that happened?" "Just, do your best, Sakura-chan. And if you feel like additional support is required dash. I'll tell Ino to commission Team 3 for a D rank," Sakura filled in. Don't worry, sensei. I'll punch Chuji until he punches back. It's worked on harder cases." She pointed her thumb at Sasuke. Sasuke shrugged. "That's not the funny part though," Sakura added. Yoshi giggled again. "Nah. The funny part is that Shikamaru is going to be there." There was half a minute of silence as Team Kakashi contemplated this assertion. Irika took the chance to mark down the time and names of the ninja who had accepted their assignments to the respective missions. He made a cursory check of the entire room. There were few people this late in the morning. A pair of Takujas seemed to be on the verge of releasing Ki out of impatience with Kakashi's team blocking the proceedings, but Irika could not care less. He still had something to discuss with Yoshi, and Batsu-san's desk was free. At second glance it turned out that there was a clone sitting at Batsu-san's desk and Batsu-san himself was gone. That explained why the Takujas still waited. The same went for the team in line behind them, and for the lone Chunin that looked like she had gotten no sleep in the past week. Irika pulled a familiar form out of a drawer and started composing a scathing report on his colleague. Yoshino-san would have a field day with this one. The walks of the drowned, Sasuke muttered under his breath, gleeful with fresh realization. Irika channeled chakra to his ears. Yep. So many sewer-related missions in a row that Yoshinobu-san banned him from coming home like that, and you can sorta imagine the reactions he got when he tried the public baths. Dunked in the river? Sakura assumed. Twice a day. Tragically, it's the river on the opposite side of town from the Nara compound. How does Ino control his mission assignments? Sakura breathed, impressed. Yes, Irika would have liked to know that too. Yoshi shrugged. By dating the guy who handles them. Proving that all ninja were shameless eavesdroppers and gossips, everyone in the room and Batsu-san's clone turned to look at Irika. Irika mentally noted their names and reshuffled some of the missions. Let's see a jounin deal with a shower of solo D-ranks. Ha! The chunin would get her due in the form of some very inconvenient prank later, when she didn't look so sleep-deprived that she might reflexively kill the closest civilian if startled. There was no excuse for accusing Irika of even looking at one of his former students that way. For goodness sake, was Yamanaka-chan 14 yet? And when Irika found which one of his colleagues did look at her in an unsavory way, there would be a reckoning. It better not have been Batsu-san, or Irika would have him put on the Earth Border Patrol for the rest of his life. Which would not be long. Yoshi-kun, Irika said, still smiling, even though Yoshi could clearly tell the expression for the implied threat that it was, would you be so kind and deliver this to Inoichi-san? I meant to take it over earlier, but time's gotten away from me. Yoshi huffed and raised his eyebrows to convey that's what you're going with, sensei? With unexpected eloquence. Nevertheless, he did accept the storage scroll and inspect the seal. Not the standard office Fuinjutsu supplier. He leered. Ooh, it's personal communication. If it blows up with paint and glitter, I'm throwing you under the wagon, sensei. Irika rolled his eyes. He had not expected proficiency with seal work from Yoshi-kun, but he had expected the unexpected, so he was not shocked. Impressed, perhaps, but he knew better than to show it. Last time he had been so startled that Team 7 got the best of him, but he was not going to take that lying down. Merely some educational literature, Irika said. It had the advantage of being absolutely truthful. Ino looked up from painting her nails just in time to see Chuji faceplant into the grass so hard that the earth shook. She looked back down. She was not entirely sure this was her color. One would say that pearly purple would be perfect for her, and it did look amazing in the bottle, but on her nails it seemed a little lackluster. Get up, straw dummy, ordered Sakura. Chuji groaned, pulled himself up on all four, and turned over so he could drop onto his butt. Can't we please take a break? You took a 6-month break. Ino reminded him. Don't your fists hurt, Sakura-chan? Chuji inquired plaintively. Sakura cracked her knuckles. Chuji groaned again. A shadow fell over Ino's nails, and she hissed at the idiot who was just asking to join Chuji in this exercise. Except Ino would tie his hands behind his back first, so that Sakura could have an easier job of it. I have an idea, Shikamaru said. He took a deep breath, audibly bracing himself, and then suggested, why don't I henge into Sakura and switch with her for a while? Ino's head shot up. Intrigued against her will, she signed at Sakura to go along with this new plan. Chuji would still go easy on Shikamaru because Chuji hated seeing his friends hurt, but at least he would let himself get annoyed and hit back. Additionally, this might have a cathartic effect. She liked annoying Shikamaru by stealing Chuji from him, but a Shikamaru-less Chuji was a morose Chuji, and a morose Chuji was just depressing. Seeing him upset annoyed her. She preferred him contented and, sadly, Shikamaru was an indelible part of that. Chuji punching Shikamaru a few times would be good for them both. And enjoyable for Ino. Sakura sat down in the grass next to her. I'm not sure I like it, she commented toward Ino's drying nails. Ino shrugged. We can use the rest of the bottle to decorate Laziar's kunai. Yoshi taught me a simple static shock seal. She gestured toward the pile of weapons and gear Shikamaru had discarded before he took Sakura's place in the center of the training field. In said center, Choji finally unbent enough to clock the Sakura lookalike in the face. Ino whistled, grudgingly impressed. I knew the moron was obnoxious, but I had no idea he could be that obnoxious. I thought for sure Choji would hold out longer than 2 minutes. Sakura grinned. Well, I did soften him up a lot. I think in another 2 minutes he would have punched even the real me. Ino grinned back. That's on the agenda for tomorrow. What was that? Snapped Kurama. He preferred to sleep while his host went about his day, but when the idiot worm nearly cooked itself, Kurama could not afford to ignore it. The mission said to clean up this parcel, replied his jailer. It had not yet regained its typical ease of manner, and from what little Kurama recalled of the distant past, this sort of behavior indicated an emotional problem. It tied in reasonably with the allergies from their earlier meeting. I agree with the burn it all to cinders idea of cleanup, but I thought your species frowned on that? Kurama distinctly recalled some of the humans getting, but heard about him crushing their precious anthill. The blue and yellow worm shrugged. I'm friends with Sasuke. What did they expect? Their dad stared at the glossy pieces of paper in his hands. Yoshi, why is Irika-sensei sending me pamphlets about the dangers of drug abuse? Ino started giggling. And maybe he worries, YUM might have a problem, daddy. You do raid Yoshinobu-san's stash a lot. Dad gave her a look that implied that his patience was dwindling, but there was no emotion behind it except puzzlement. Ino had no clue either, but that did not prevent her from enjoying Dad's bemusement. Yoshi placed his chin in the cup formed by his hands and grinned. Ooh, he's being sneaky. Sakura freaked him out by sorta implying that we were going to get high and blow up stuff dash. Sakura on drugs, Ino said in awe. Now there's a walking natural disaster dash. Which we weren't going to really do, 'cause I agree with Ino on this one, and Sasuke's still real worried that Sakura will snap and annihilate a clan. He gets twitchy after she pours herself a second cup of sake. Am I supposed to know that you drink? Dad inquired dryly. Yoshi shrugged. I'm not ashamed of it. He raised his eyebrows. I mean, Dad, where do you think I learnt it? We don't overdo it and, yeah, it's not like it does anything for me. But you should see Sasuke. He goes all soft and tactile, and at one point I could tell Sakura was trying to decide if she would eat him literally or metaphorically dash. Don't tell me these things, exclaimed Dad. Tell me all the details, insisted Ino. All of them. Dad glared at the pamphlet again and rubbed his temple. Well, this is a really nice gesture, except that all the horses had fled and I can't be bothered with closing the barn door now. Aside from everything else, you shook off Anko's poisons in training so many times that she asked me for your hand in marriage. Yoshi looked intrigued. Ino felt intrigued. Not by the Yoshi and Anko-san thing, but more by Anko-san herself. That sounded educational. Dad tugged on Yoshi's ponytail. Don't even try that on me, son. I'm not going to scandalize 9/10 of the village for your amusement. And remember that you promised dash. Yep. Yoshi practically squeaked. Ino pounced on him, determined to get to the bottom of what was shaping up to be delightful blackmail material, but Dad had them separated in a sidestep and a twist. Ino happily cuddled into his chest instead. You're both adults now, Dad said, holding them just this side of painfully tight. I know it and you know it. If you want to poison yourself, that's your prerogative. He paused and then concluded, with utmost conviction, you'll be smart about it. Yes, Dad dash. Don't yes, Dad me, daughter dash. IW will, D-Dad, Ino assured him, trying in vain to suppress the giggles. Son? Dad demanded. Yoshi stood straight under Dad's arm, coming almost up to his shoulder, still an inch shorter than Ino, and said, I promise I cross drunken debauchery and getting someone pregnant off my list of potential teenage rebellion plans. Dad shook his head, despairing. I wish I had been as prudent as you when I was a teenager. He walked away after that proclamation, while Ino and Yoshi were both too stunned to react. But Ino looked at Yoshi. We know we do not have an older sibling. Yoshi looked back at her. They were in perfect agreement on this one. They needed to know what their dad did. Hi, Rasen-kun, called out Yamanaka Yoshi, skipping across the street toward the market stall where Neji was acting the bodyguard while Hanabi-sama prevaricated over confectionery. Your name's Rasen, right? Yamanaka Ino appeared a moment later from the same direction. She hit her brother's shoulder. Stupid brother. It's Yuzu. Hi, Yuzu-kun. Hanabi-sama turned away from the display of candied fruits and surveyed the two blondes with an expression of intense loathing. Cousin? Who are these people? Neji refrained from pointing out that she had been in the audience when the siblings competed in the Chunin exams tournament. Far be it from his younger cousin to pay attention to those beneath her, unless their distress entertained her. They are Chunin of Konoha, Hanabi-sama, he said sardonically. For an instant he felt pleased at the opportunity to be the bearer of unpleasant news. It was nowhere near enough to make up for the humiliation of his own defeat in the preliminaries, but he had to learn to take his small petty satisfactions where he could. The standards really have fallen. Hanabi-sama sniffed and grimaced as though she had caught a whiff of the septic tank. Her expression was nearly the carbon copy of Elder Sumaya's. Not just that cripple on your team, but these clowns? At this rate it's a miracle someone did not push a promotion up Hinata's fat argrk. Neji moved to defend Hanabi-sama from the madwoman's attack, but found himself blocked by what looked like a Bastardi's Juken strike from the boy. Neji countered and was about to activate the Byakugan, when the boy waved a seal tag in an implied threat. Neji shivered in remembrance of the soul-pervading cold. Don't worry, said the boy, losing all former levity, Ino won't hurt her. But Ino also won't let anyone abuse Hinata-chan. And I dash a pair of narrowed blue eyes pinned Neji with a look so weighted it almost felt like a physical force. Won't either. The Yamanaka girl finished threatening Hanabi-sama with a presumably poisoned senbon and stepped up to her brother's shoulder. See, Spiral Guy, this is us being nice. You don't want us to stop being nice. Besides, Yoshi's convinced that you're better than this, and that you only bullied Hinata due to social pressure rather than getting off on it, which I'm not entirely sold on dash. Hinata-chan wouldn't keep giving him yet another chance every time he fucks up if she didn't see something in him, said the brother, although his skeptical expression belied his words. HNFNMHNT or, exclaimed Hanabi-sama. See you around, Free Will Kun, Yamanaka Ino said, twirling her fingers in a mocking wave. She and her brother departed while Neji activated his Byakugan, saw through the genjutsu of his younger cousin sitting calmly on the edge of the merchant's cart to the truth of her struggling against bindings, plain rope rather than ninja wire, clearly indicating the intention to restrain, but not harm on the part of Yamanaka, and moved to free her. He did expect the yelling and the punishing strikes. A few closed tenketsu and a handful of contusions were a paltry punishment for failing in his duty to protect her. He managed not to reflexively retaliate by virtue of long practice. He hoped she was satisfied now, and would not subject him to a harsher punishment at Hayashi-sama's hands. It was never worth it to deny Hanabi-sama her little amusements, not if you had a cursed seal on your forehead. Neji wondered what it was like to a family whom you could trust and respect. And if the resentment he felt for the Yamanaka siblings would ever abate. Will you buy anything, Ninja-sama? Asked the merchant. Because if not, might you move along before you scare away my customers dash. Mind who you're addressing. Snapped Hanabi-sama. Hinata-sama would not have done that, Neji thought. And for the first time he accepted that there might have been a difference between temperance and weakness. The merchant fell silent and bowed in apology, but Neji could clearly read her fear and hatred. He wondered if this was what had happened to the Uchiha. And if the caged bird seal was not all that stood between him and a district full of corpses. "Have you spoken with Yoshi lately? What do you want with him?" Choji asked. It came out harsher than he meant it to, but maybe that was a good thing. He didn't know how to stand up to Shikamaru, and he hated trying, but obviously it needed to be done sometimes. Choji wanted to be a good friend, even when Shika made it difficult. Their friendship was more than worth a little additional effort. "Never mind then," Shika replied, a bit less apathetic and more resigned than was his normal. Sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was give them space, Choji thought. And sometimes giving someone space was the worst thing you could do to them. Choji had no idea how to tell which occasion was which. As time passed and Shika's friendship with Yoshi failed to heal, he suspected that Shika had the same problem. Naruto was grateful for the reality checks from the Kyuubi and impressed that Irika-sensei managed to wage a semi-effective campaign against Team Kakashi, but he wasn't exactly in the best mood even before he came home and found Ino balancing on the edge between furious and moping. "Whom do I make wish I had killed them instead?" he asked. His knuckles itched to hit something. Not that wholesale destruction of property was not satisfying, but it lacked the adrenaline kick of a proper fight. "Pipe down," Ino grumbled, and plopped a piece of chocolate into her mouth. "Renji broke up with me, but he did it because Irika-sensei clued him in that I'm not actually 15, and he went into some kind of existential crisis." It was mildly entertaining. Ino, not that I want to stick my nose into your love life, but I feel like there's a line, and this went a little too far beyond dash." "Calm down." She rolled her eyes and threw the next bonbon just so that Naruto could easily catch it into his mouth. "It's not like I conned him into sex dash. You just conned him into wanting it with you." Naruto swallowed down the rising bile together with the chocolate. Nope, not thinking of his sister in a compromising position. Trauma galore. Which is a basic conversion technique dash. That we're not supposed to use on our allies, he reminded her. Fine. She put her feet up onto the coffee table and blindly rooted inside the box for another bonbon. "Let's be boring." "Boring?" Yoshi repeated, aghast. "What? Did you give up on torturing Shikamaru?" "It's not fun when he rolls over and takes it," Ino grumbled. "Well, not for me. Maybe for someone else it would be." "Maybe?" Yoshi said blandly, faking disinterest. "I've gotta go water my plants now. Come get me if you want to spar after dinner." He disappeared upstairs. Ino deflated. She could not believe that he had not taken that opportunity after she had set it up for him so perfectly. It was just as she had suspected. The wound of his broken friendship with Shikamaru had only been cauterized, not healed. And it still hurt, too much for Yoshi to joke about it, and he joked about damn near everything. Murder and extensive trauma were clearly fair game. Yoshi could fool almost everyone including himself. It was up to his family to knock some sense into him. But Mom wasn't coming home for months yet, and Dad had far too much faith in them. So it was up to Ino to start unfucking this terrible knot of pretenses and misapprehensions and denied feelings. Ino buried her face in a sofa cushion and started working on accepting the inevitable to the background of colorful mental invective. Why, brother? Why him of all people? Shikamaru limped home from the hospital sporting 2 black eyes. At least he didn't stink of waste today, but Yoshino still watched her son with concern. She wished he were a little less intelligent. It might have made him a little smarter. "I know," he said, passing her in the living room. "The bones are fine, it's just bruising. I told the medic to leave it like that. There's marginal chance Ino will kill me less tomorrow if I already look half dead." Yoshino followed the logic and once again confirmed for herself that her son was the most intelligent moron she knew, his father notwithstanding. "She won't. Ino-chan feels no pity." Her son's shoulders slumped further. That posture looked extremely uncomfortable, and also like a swift road to hyperlordosis. Whatever, Shikamaru groused, trudging up the stairs at a snail's pace. When I die, give all my effects to Chuji. He deserves some kind of recompense. And bury you next to an empty lot reserved for your star-crossed love? Yoshino thought pithily, but she did not say it out loud. Since it's the last day of my assignment to your team, Sakura announced cheerfully, it's my treat. You might want to rethink that, Ino warned her, poking Chuji's stomach. Are your parents rich enough? Sakura shrugged. It's fine. Kakashi-sensei's coming back tomorrow, and then we'll get another B-rank. Besides, Yoshi's agreed to meet us at Yakiniku-Q. Shikamaru inconspicuously sauntered up to trudge along in their wake. What special form of torture did Irika-sensei inflict upon him today? Ino inquired, definitely hoping for some juicy blackmail. Something with the Inuzuka dogs, Sakura replied. That doesn't sound too bad, Ino decided, looking disappointed. It was her own fault, she had, after all, managed to redirect all the worst D-ranks to Shikamaru. Well, we're not too far out, Sakura estimated. We would have heard any major explosions. I guess that means that Kiba wasn't home. Ino nodded, putting her arm around Sakura's waist. That boy can't stop pulling Yoshi's pigtails. Shikamaru shuffled forwards at the tail of the procession, hands in his pockets and eyes on the clouds on the horizon. Yoshi in pigtails, ha! Yoshi in pigtails was an unbearably adorable picture, and Shikamaru was extremely lucky that it had never happened, or he might have just given up on the last vestiges of his sanity and done something devastatingly impetuous. As in, more devastatingly impetuous than sabotaging his own team. He went out with a bunch of the other rookies lately, so I thought it was getting better, Chuza said sadly to the glass of beer. But it was just an aberration. Shikamaru and Chuji are still so insular. He drained the glass and signaled the barkeep for another. Inoichi, your kids used to be just like that. How did you get them to make friends? Inoichi straightened. He felt the foam cap on his nose, but watching Chuza try and not snicker at him was worth not wiping it off. Oh, I just gave them a project. Not that the project had inspired Ino and Yoshi to widen their circle of confidence, they barely trusted him and Yuki as it were. It did, however, get them to care for other people, which was almost as good. A project? Chuza repeated. Shikaka didn't glance up from his drink, but he looked focused. He was either listening or in the middle of some complicated mental exercise. Yes, Inoichi confirmed. One that forced them to try and understand their peers. Then it was just a matter of waiting until they became attached. To an Uchiha and a Hyuga respectively, of course, because if anyone had asked Inoichi what sort of associates he wouldn't want for his children, those would have been the first two names he mentioned. In hindsight, how could he have ever respected anything else from his beloved Hellspawn? It's very easy with Yoshi. He genuinely wants to be everybody's friend. Ino has more stringent requirements. Shikako contemplated for a long, quiet while, then he straightened on the bar stool and let his head fall back. His neck popped. That probably wouldn't help me. Nor me, agreed Chuza. His new beer was half gone already. Inoichi squeezed what little his hand could encompass of Chuza's shoulder, and then turned to Shikako. Are you actually worried that your son has no friends, or do you think he should start networking? Because those require different approach. Shikako waved his hand without a care. He's a Nara. People will come to him. Networking happens by itself for us. Chuza snorted. Inoichi struggled not to roll his eyes. Networking for the Nara didn't happen by itself. It happened by befriending a Yamanaka. And remind me, how many friends do you have? Does Yoshino count? Shikako asked half seriously. As if Inoichi knew. His personal experience proved that friendship was the basis of a harmonious marriage, and he had his assumptions about Shikako and Yoshino, but not ones he would voice. I don't know. You tell me. Choza took a deep pull from his glass to get himself exempted from this dialogue. He looked like he regretted bringing up the topic. 5. Shikako decided, and accepted Choza's thump on the back with an upward quirk of his lips, despite the fact that Choza hit even harder when tipsy. That blow would have cracked a few ribs if the recipient wasn't used to the way of the Akimichi. Inoichi had honestly expected a lower number. 5 people you liked and trusted was an enormous treasure. That's pretty good. How many did you have at Shikamaru's age? 3. Shikako suggested tentatively. That's still 2 more than my son. You're not counting Yoshi? Choza inquired, frowning. Shikako gave him a sardonic look. No. Inoichi considered this and nodded. Fair enough. Evening, Tsunade-sama, said Hirozen-sensei's son. Tsunade scrutinized first him and then Hatake. They had one concerning injury between the two of them, and that had been dressed with acceptable proficiency. Nevertheless. Sarutobi-kun, verbal report now. Hatake, you can compose a written one in the hospital. No, Hatake, that is not a suggestion. Hatake saluted and jumped out of the window like the drama queen he was. Asuma smirked around his unlit cigarette. The good news is, the fire daimyo sends his congratulations on your appointment, so we can scrap the assassination plans. And the bad news? Asked Tsunade. The new Kazekage wasn't so lucky, so there's a bit of a civil war going on just past the Land of Rivers. Tsunade was not particularly worried. The bloodthirsty Jinchuriki from the latest Chunin exams was a member of the Godame Kazekage's Jinnin team, and there was no one left in the Land of Wind that had a prayer of standing against the teacher-student duo. Also, Asuma said, please tell Kakashi not to go on a murdering spree all over the Stone Village. He won't tell me what happened to rekindle his hatred, but that guy needs his head checked, Tsunade-sama. Tsunade stared at the young man for a prolonged while and then said, with satisfying dryness, he does? I had no idea. Chapter 22, Big Bad Shinobi. Chapter text. Choji was ecstatic. Choji was ecstatic because he was a Chunin too. Things had been getting better, almost back to normal, even before, and watching Shikamaru grovel without looking like he was groveling was unexpectedly fun. Choji didn't like feeling like that, but Shikamaru had totally brought it on himself. Asuma-sensei trained them a lot more, and by the time of the next Chunin exams Choji had formed a team with Sakura-chan, who was very scary, and Hinata-chan, who was scary too, but a lot nicer, and they all passed. Congratulations! Called out Yoshi, meeting them at the gates, while Sasuke stood off to the side and pretended to be uninvolved. He hugged Choji and Sakura-chan, then he mimed a hug toward Hinata-chan and waited until she came to him before squeezing her gently. Choji wished he had known that was the secret. Hinata-chan made him feel too big and strong and clumsy with the way she kept flinching, and then trying to dismiss it like it was nothing. Then Ino appeared, hugging Choji hard enough to crack a rib. And right, there was Shikamaru. They exchanged a half-hug and a manly back pat, and it was like everything was okay again. Choji was so happy he could have cried. I'm having a celebration, Hinata-chan said to Yoshi, and then turned around to include everybody present. It's tradition. I will try to make it less formal though, and you're all invited. Ino immediately perked up. Sasuke-kun, will you go with me? No. Ino pouted, although she was obviously more amused by Sasuke's momentary horror than disappointed. She turned around and narrowed her eyes at Shikamaru. Shikamaru, you're my date for Hinata's party. No, said Shikamaru, grimacing. It was likely that this rejection would mess up things when they only just made up, but no less resolute than Sasuke had been a moment ago. What do you mean no? Demanded Ino. Her amusement was gone. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. You can't order me around, Ino, snapped Shikamaru. And I am spoken for. I will not betray my significant other by parading around with you. A hush fell on the entire group. Yoshi was leading Hinata-chan away swiftly, but it was already too late. Choji could see her trembling lips. She probably regretted issuing the invitations, or perhaps even having a party to celebrate her amazing success. Choji wished there was a way to take it all back, to somehow undo the whole scene and start from scratch. And he wished his chest didn't ache so badly. He knew he had been leaving Shikamaru behind too much when things were messed up and Ino tried to, kind of steal Choji away from Shika. But he had also always made sure to spend some time with his best friend. And Shika still never told him. You're what? When? Who? This makes no sense. Ino went pale and shaky. She was frowning, her eyes began to glisten as if she was about to cry. She looked really upset. As upset as Choji felt. How come I don't know about this? She turned to Choji with a mute question. Choji gulped. Just a guess, Ino, but this reaction might be why. He didn't have a clue what to tell her. Ino covered her mouth with her fist, lips pressed to her knuckles, and for a moment just quietly quivered in mounting anger. Then she rounded on Shikamaru. I was actually considering being on your side, like an idiot, even after all the bullshit, because even when I thought you couldn't be trusted, I at least believed that you were invested. Forget it, trash bag. She threw in one last venomous glower and stomped away. And that almost sounded like Ino was in love with Shikamaru. Which no. That was absurd. Choji was willing to believe a lot of things, but not that. Are you really in a relationship, Shika? He asked, trying to figure out how not to feel betrayed that he hadn't even known Shikamaru was interested in someone. Shikamaru shrugged and scratched at his hairline. It's more of a hypothetical relationship right now. So, Shikamaru was interested in somebody, and there were probably the awkward kind of feelings, if he didn't want to harm his chances by appearing as Ino's date even just in the name of groveling. Choji knew better than anyone how focused and serious and, to be honest, obsessive, Shikamaru could get. Mostly he had a lot of fleeting topics of shallow interest, since his brain always needed something to chew on, but once in a while something stuck, and then nobody and nothing could get it out of his mind. It was wedged there for good. That was what had happened when Shika tried to break Team 10. So, if an actual person stuck in Shikamaru's mind, or maybe in his heart, that could probably happen too, there was no way of getting them out of there short of removing the organ itself. Good luck, Choji said and smiled and hoped the smile didn't look as faint as it felt. Tell me if you need a wingman, yeah? Shikamaru smirked and nodded, even though Choji was quite sure that once Shika made his move, there would be no need for any wingmaning. It would be a lightning-fast precision strike at the end of a long stealth campaign. A pre-planned snatch and grab. And it was fine by him, as long as his best friend was happy. Yeah, so, congratulations on your promotion, said Shikamaru, mustering a grin for Choji's sake. Choji nodded. Asuma-sensei promised to pay for dinner. You in? Godame-sama had poured herself a cup of sake the moment the messenger hawk landed on the windowsill. It turned out to be propitious, because the message contained a single pictogram, a sad, frowny face. She downed the alcohol and moved back to her desk to pour another shot. Shikako had long since stopped passive-aggressively trying to convince her to lower her intake. There was no point to it, as of yet he had not noticed that it significantly affected her faculties, but he did discover a marked rise in property damage, personal assault and signs of depression whenever she neared sobriety. So, Orochimaru fucked off like the yellow-bellied lizard he is, but on the bright side we've more or less won on the sound front. Shikako nodded. There was a difference between cowardice and self-preservation, but the woman was more than entitled to her rancor. He was not personally acquainted with Orochimaru, to his continued pleasure, and could not even hazard a guess on how the snake sage might react. He merely suspected that the reaction would not, in fact, be cowardly at all. Will he organize guerrilla attacks? Or come directly to Konoha? Tsunade-sama waved her hand. Nah. He'll hole up somewhere again and in 15 years' time come back as the Kage of the village hidden in bird shit or something equally as fitting. Shikaka bit on the inside of his cheek. Shall I send a response to Jiraiya-sama? Nah, repeated their esteemed Hokage. The moron can use his words if he wants to talk. Sides, it's not like we haven't done this before. We just need a blonde upstart to single-handedly slaughter a stone platoon. Whatever happened to Mark II? I was sure we had a replacement in the works. Ah, Shikaka said, hoping that his pretense of nonchalance together with Hokage-sama's inebriation would suffice to deceive. If you mean Yondaime-sama's legacy, the official status is missing, but since it has been 10 years, I am afraid everyone has lost hope. Tsunade-sama's face fell. Her eyes glistened for a moment before she turned to the window and pinched the bridge of her nose. No wonder Orochimaru fucked off. And Jiraiya fucked off. I should have fucking stayed fucked off. This fucking village. Shikaka mutely handed her another bottle and felt like a heel. Shikamaru watched the clouds pass overhead and wondered what it would be like to just let the wind carry him off to some other place where he would turn into a lot of falling water. It was a scary, scary day when Ino was the most observant person in Konoha. And she was only going to get better at it, Shikamaru was sure. If she could get a personality transplant, he would be happy to have her on his team. Kunoichi of her caliber were rare. No wonder his mother harbored that terrifying adoration for her. Why are women so aggressive? He mused. The clouds did not offer an opinion. They were placid. Placid like many other women, civilian mostly, but also some of the Kunoichi, those that got married or retired from active duty, mostly, and Shikamaru answered his own question. They were aggressive because they had to be. Yeah, okay, he sighed. Maybe he should trust Ino a little more. It was just difficult. He was pretty sure that Ino wanted him to fail in the one particular endeavor that was most important to him, and she would not hesitate to sabotage him. He could see her point. And Choji was feeling slighted that he didn't know whom Shikamaru meant when Ino did, but it wasn't like Shikamaru had told Ino. She just paid way too much attention to exactly those things he would have preferred her to miss. He groaned and rolled over. Time to go to team training and try to patch things up. Again. The war leaked, as war did, from sound to grass, and the land of Earth started rumbling with the vision of potential acquisitions too. Suddenly there were fewer shinobi in the village. Team Asuma had finished their C rank just in time for Ino to get home, shower, dress and hurry over to the restaurant where Hinata-chan's party took place. She arrived with minutes to spare and so content to let Hinata-chan seat her, and set a tall glass of juice in front of her. Ino sat, sipped, and watched the guests trickle into the room and mingle. Shikamaru was already there, hiding in a corner with Shino. Tenten was talking to a trio of older Kunoichi, one of whom was Kurenai-sensei. There were a few smaller children, all Hyuga, supervised closely by blank-faced adults. Ino had known from the start that party wouldn't be quite the right word, but this looked dismal. Hinata-heim! Exclaimed Lee, bursting into the room. He wasn't wearing the green leotard, which confused Ino for a moment, but then it turned out that he was exactly the same person even in a kimono. My most sincere congratulations on your amazing achievement. He thrust a bouquet of wildflowers into Hinata's hands. It was startling. Ino had brought a gift, of course, but something inside her softened as she watched this boy clumsily express his appreciation. He didn't seem like he had anybody to ask about the protocol. If it even occurred to him that there was protocol, he just plowed through on sheer determination. And it was clear how much Hinata-chan liked that strength to persevere despite huge obstacles. Ha, Ino thought, and smiled around her straw. In the end Choji arrived, too, and that was it. Hayashi-sama presided over the dinner, sitting to Hinata-chan's right and making her so terribly nervous that she barely even ate anything. To Hinata-chan's left sat her little sister Hanabi and, judging by Hinata-chan's little flinches, either muttered little digs under her breath or kicked. Ino broke a pair of chopsticks, her fingers just squeezed as she imagined them wrapped around the little brat's throat. Ino. Yes, Chuji? So. Team 7's not coming? Ino rolled her eyes at the sashimi she was rearranging on her plate. Why sashimi? Glad that her fringe hid the gesture. You can tell Shikamaru that Team Kakashi has left on a mission while we were on ours. They're not expected back for a couple of weeks. Chuji sighed, and then turned to his other side. I told you she would see through it. Shikamaru could just grow a pair, or stop pining like a forest. Ino had no idea how she could have believed he was actually dating someone. She had just been blindsided by his utter pathos. It was like he already considered himself married or something. This was getting ridiculous. But maybe this wasn't the best time? With the war heating up and experienced shinobi being sent to the front lines, newer teams were tapped for support and to fill in for the senior chunin. Ino expected that they would start on their own beer ranks soon enough, now that Chuji had been promoted too. On the other hand, who cared about timing? They were ninja. They had to grab their chances as they occurred. And maybe plotting would distract her from worrying about her brother and her best friend and, alright, about Sasuke-kun too. Fine then. Here came the biggest challenge of her life, making Nara Shikamaru's dream come true. Shursho. Shizun. Tsunade exclaimed, leaping over the desk to get to her apprentice faster. Her hands glowed green as she reflexively channeled healing chakra. Shizun looked terrible, but fortunately her injuries were light, and the death-warmed-over look was owed to sheer exhaustion. Tsunade put an arm around her and pulled her over to deposit her into the Hokage's chair. The girl tensed like she wanted to protest, but she did not have enough energy. Tsunade poured a cup of sake and tried to force it down Shizun's throat, only to encounter a defensive block, which resulted in the alcohol being spilled over her trousers. Shizun narrowed her eyes. The intention was a derisive stare, but it just made her look like she was about to fall asleep. She pressed 2 scrolls into Tsunade's cup-free hand. The report from Jiraiya-sama and the body of Sandaime-sama's murderer. Tsunade threw the cup away, didn't give a damn that it shattered into a dozen pieces, and pulled Shizun to her. The girl almost smothered against her stomach, but for the moment Tsunade couldn't help herself. There was this toxic cocktail of emotions, satisfaction, retroactive fear for her apprentice, grief and sheer nostalgia for the era that had disappeared like yesterday's smoke, replaced with this cage of an office. The Hokage is dead, long live the Hokage. It was Yakushi, after all, Shizun muttered once she managed to turn her head and inhale. Good job, Tsunade thought, and hoped that her desperate clutching conveyed some of it. And then she thought, secretly, just to herself, that this was the last time she would doubt the intelligence brought to her by a Yamanaka-Hyuga duo. Next time academy graduation came about, she was going to take an avid interest in team assignments. For now though, she was going to raise a toast to her late sensei and memorize how it felt when one of the very few people she gave a damn about did come back to her safe and sound. Yoshi took to wearing a bandana. So did Sakura. It was the only outward indication they gave to what kind of missions they were taking. Shikamaru tried not to think about it, he had enough worries of his own, what with intermittent mission lead whenever a Suma-sensei was needed elsewhere, which was increasingly often. It was a rare day when he met his former classmates in the village. Oh come on, everyone knows the drapes are fake, shouted Kiba, and Shikamaru automatically moved that way, toward the market. Did you know there's a betting pool about the color of the carpet? People are gonna try to check. Yoshi, who was obviously the target of that unfortunately phrased, but likely well-meant, warning, grabbed Sakura to prevent her from eviscerating the loudmouth. He did not manage to stop Sasuke. Fortunately, the Uchiha contented himself with spilling a bucket of fish guts from a nearby stall over Kiba's head. That means Yoshi's flattered, but he does not feel the same way, Sakura explained helpfully. Kiba wiped his face, licked his hand, grimaced, and strode off amidst promises or retaliation that probably somewhat overestimated his own abilities. He wasn't really hitting on me, Yoshi pointed out. Presumably he knew Kiba well enough to interpret that clumsy attempt at sharing intel. Then he snorted. But maybe I shouldn't have spent so much time hinged into Hinata-chan for him. I think I confused him. Sasuke replied unrepentantly. Yoshi glanced in the direction Kiba had fled. Anyone else feel like we're unnecessarily mean to Kiba? You lead by example, Sakura told him, and then huffed. Not that I don't get where he's coming from. I envy you the hair too. Shikamaru paused at the mouth of the street and found himself just watching Team 7 go about, making purchases and chatting with vendors. Yoshi's hair was loose today, long and light gold, reflecting the sun. Perhaps to a sufficiently sensitive nose he smelled of bleach again, and that was what had provoked Kiba to such crudeness. But most likely the Inuzuka was just angry at himself for falling into the same trap as everybody else. It was difficult not to be entranced. Yoshi was radiant. The human race, Shikamaru thought despondently, was full of morons. Gambling morons at that. You only had to look at the hair on Yoshi's forearms, or at Yoshi's eyelashes, to see that he was a natural blonde. Just not Yamanaka blonde. Shino raised his eyebrows. It was one of very few of his facial expressions that had any effect on his audience. Kiba glared up from the brook, where he was cleaning the worst of the damage from his shirt and hair. Look, I know I should have phrased it better. But he's always really got on my nerves, 'cause everything about him is fake. I get that it's a shinobi skill, but other people relax when they're inside the village. That guy is not himself even at home. I know, I was there. I actually have no damn clue who he is. And thus, true to the Inuzuka temperament, he kept trying to provoke Yoshi into displaying a visceral reaction. Shino nodded. That is remarkably astute of you. He had a clue, owing to his Kakechu, but once that first clue was obtained, he stopped searching further. If his knowledge should compromise Yoshi-san's safety, it was not worth it. Kiba snorted. You're telling me you know who he is. Paradoxically, despite literally living a lie, Yoshi-san is one of the most genuine people I know. Shino trusted him implicitly, and so did the ladybug. I hide much of myself too. You're not a manipulator. Kiba must have decided that he was as clean as he could get without a shower and a change of attire, and squelched out of the water. Shino was not looking forward to today's team training. He had not been aware that fish innards grew quite so pungent. He pulled his collar higher before he inhaled and replied, No. But I have the luxury of being under the protection of an excellent one. Kiba shrugged and stared off in the direction from which they expected their third teammate to arrive. Yeah, I get that. Respect. I wanted to be friends with him. Tried a few times. Since Shino had once been personally subjected to Kiba's idea of attempting to initiate friendship, he was not surprised by the lack of success of this endeavor. But I'm not gonna be friends with a persona, and he refuses to be a real person. Shino accepted this reasoning. He maintained that it was Kiba's loss, but that was Shino's personal feeling, and it had no bearing on his teammate's decision. Is that from Yuki? Yoshino asked quietly. Inoichi sighed and nodded. She as well? Inoichi nodded again. She twirled her glass around and then watched the little alcoholic funnel smooth out into a clear surface. Sometimes it just gets so damn quiet around here. It was good to share the quiet with someone. Yoshino missed Yuki too. Mayu wasn't much of a drinker, and Shikako fell either asleep or deep into his thoughts. Inoichi's loneliness was different from Yoshino's, far less existentialist, tied to the very physical absence of his wife, but he got it. He tapped the edge of his glass against the counter. I look at the kids and think, weren't we like that just a couple years ago? I would not take any of it back, but it's hard not to envy them. She suggested. Sometimes she did envy them. Sometimes she wished she were 15 again, and still believed that she would one day achieve her dreams. She didn't regret much, she had a good life, and most days she was still crazy head over heels in love with her husband, at least at those times when she wasn't plotting his bloody and gory murder, but she still got so damn melancholy sometimes. No. It isn't. Inoichi shook his head, ponytail swinging to and fro. We had our youth, they have theirs. Our youth was swallowed by a fucking war, she pointed out. Then it's our sacred fucking duty to make sure theirs isn't. Too late, Yoshino thought. She didn't say it, because if Inoichi could ever be broken, it would have been by the accusation that he had failed his children. He poured far too much of himself into those kids to withstand it if anything ever happened to them. Honestly, Yoshino was not sure what it would do to her and Shikaku if they survived their son, but they would survive. Inoichi? Not a chance. Still, she hoped that he was a little bit right, that this would not be like the Third Shinobi War. Can I ask for a favor? He spoke after a long while of silence. Sure. You'll already owe us until your grandchildren make jounin, so one more favor doesn't make much difference. She enjoyed his horror-struck expression. Not that he could expect grandchildren out of Yoshi, but Ino still stood a chance. I told Yuki to stay where she was until this conflict blows over. I don't want her trekking across a battleground with no one to cover her back. But I'm going out there tomorrow, and if dash. Stop right there. Contrary to your staunch belief, we dash, by which she meant Mayu, Yuki and herself, know all about the super-secret Ino Shikacho pact. Our kids are communal. If you cark it, and you better not, or Hizashi will kick your skinny arse in the afterlife, they'll still have 5 parents left. Thank dash. Oh, shut up and drink your booze, Blondie. Don't call me that. What's Shikaku's is mine, and that includes dumb nicknames. Deal, Blondie. Irika left Kakashi to his well-deserved sleep and went for a walk, which conveniently led him to the TNI building. He dropped in unexpected, hoping to make a verbal report if Ibiki-san wasn't too busy. Then he had to duck into a bathroom, because there was a familiar face just coming up from the basement, where the executive part of the department lived. Yoshi-kun tapped at one of the office doors. When there was no response from inside, he walked away, pouting in his disappointment. Did you offer him the apprenticeship? Irika asked Ibiki-san a few minutes later. Little bastard turned me down. The Takuja scowled, and then shrugged it off. He's just playing hard to get. I'll indulge him for a while, and then put him to task. Irika's experience with Yoshi-kun and all the stories Kakashi had told him painted a different picture. It was unlikely that Yoshi-kun could ever be pressured into doing something he did not wish to do, and he had repeatedly stated his ambition to specialize in therapy. Still, Ibiki-san knew Irika's opinion, so Irika simply skipped over to the topic that brought him here in the first place. I didn't get much out of Kakashi. As always, he's meticulous about keeping confidential information confidential, and I don't think he would tell me anything at all about any A ranks or higher. He's too good a shinobi. He frowned. Have I mentioned what I think about a fresh Chunin team being consistently assigned A ranks? Speaking of, they are all Chunin now. And, shockingly, all still alive. Ibiki-san affected a rather unwarranted look of surprise. They beat the odds. In any case, you can stop meeting with Hatake. I'm sorry for putting you through this for so long, but you've been doing damn good work. Irika smiled. I think I'll continue dating him. He actually didn't have to think about it. Perhaps he had been thinking about it for a long time, but it was more likely that he had settled into the knowledge without the need for thought, maybe so far back as the first time he had visited Kakashi at the hospital. He looked up and found Ibiki-san staring at him incredulously. Is that a joke? Irika had expected the reaction. Even enjoyed it a little bit. He's really sort of sweet. And hilarious. Especially at times when he tried to be reassuring. Ibiki raised his hands to form the tiger seal. Kai, I'm not under a Genjutsu. Don't be so sure, Ibiki-san cut him off. Hatake has a Sharingan. Let me just test dash. Ibiki-san. Irika waited for a moment until he was sure that the Tokuju wouldn't continue his rant, and then smiled again. Ibiki-san. The man stared incredulously for another while, and then sighed. Really? Irika's smile widened. Really? You always seemed so smart. Level-headed. Down to earth. Very few people ever saw the head of YT and I acting petulantly, and most probably did not live to tell the tale. No one would have believed Irika if he tried to share the experience. I guess that might be why, he pointed out. If opposites truly attracted, as the cliché said, Irika could placate himself that it was not actually his fault, it was just chemistry. Ibiki grimaced, and then dismissed the subject with, oh well. When he fucks up, I'll make sure he'll regret it. Irika loved the optimism, he really did. This is not what I expected beer ranks to be like, Chuji gasped. The thing that fell out of the mangle of his jutsu was barely recognizable as the shinobi it had once been. Shikamaru said nothing. He was sitting under Asumataisha's genjutsu, hands folded in the rat seal, and waiting for their enemies to be herded to him. He had already dispatched 4 clones, and was now holding a pair of alligator summons paralyzed. Another attack, and Chuji disappeared among Doton-formed rocky outcrops. Shikamaru listened and waited. Seconds stretched, punctuated by slow, measured inhales and exhales. He tracked the distant sounds of Asuma's fight and Ino's traps being sprung. His shadows grabbed the third summon. A silhouette appeared in the mouth of a crevice. A long-range fighter. Their chakra pulsed. A flicker of killing intent was all the warning Shikamaru had before a hail of shuriken flew at his position. He was going to die. Already? What a pain. He could not let go of the shadows yet. He tightened his hold, breaking the summon's limbs so they couldn't gang up on Chuji afterwards. He watched as the multitude of small blades came at him. There was no time for a jutsu and nowhere to dodge. I wanted to tell him. Everything went dark. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.